Okay, we are live on YouTube.
Good morning and welcome to the July 12th, 2022 public hearing and public meeting of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. We'll begin the morning by taking attendance, and I will turn it over to Mark Silverman to call the roll.
Chair Carroll.
Here.
Vice Chair Bland.
Here.
Commissioner Shamir Barron. Commissioner Chapin.
Here.
Commissioner Chen. Commissioner Devonshire.
Here.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Here.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Here.
Commissioner Lutfi. Commissioner Holford Smith.
Here.
Right. Good morning and welcome again to the July 12th, 2022 public hearing and public meeting. We have a number of items today. We have a public hearing on a proposed designation that we'll be starting the day with. And after that, we will be moving to our public meeting agenda, where we will hear items that were read into the record last week. We will hear presentations by the applicants, and we'll hear testimony from the public on those items. We'll also have some public meeting items that are applications that have already had a hearing and are coming back today in response to comments made by the commission after listening to their presentation and the public testimony at their original hearing. And finally, we will move to our public hearing agenda, where we will review and hear new applications for work on designated properties. This meeting is being held via Zoom and live streamed on our YouTube channel. If you would like to participate in any of the hearing items, you may do so by joining the meeting at the estimated time that is shown on our agenda, which can be found on our website. And if you would just like to watch the proceedings, you may do so by going to our YouTube channel. And with that, I will turn it over to Kate Lemos-McHale, our Director of Research, to start the Research Department public hearing item.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. The first item this morning is LP 2661, the Jacob Dangler House at 441 Willoughby Avenue, aka 441 to 443 Willoughby Avenue, 163 to 167 Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn, Block 1758, Lot 1. Item to be heard is a mansion designed in the Chateauesque style by Theobald Engelhardt and built in 1897 to 98 for the merchant Jacob Dangler. I am Kate Lemos-McHale, Director of Preservation, presenting this morning. The Jacob Dangler House was designed by Theobald Engelhardt and built at the end of the 19th century for the prominent merchant Jacob Dangler, and later served for many years as the home of the United Grand Chapter of the Eastern Star. Located at the northeast corner of Willoughby and Nostrand Avenues in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, it is a fine example of the Chateauesque style that stands.
Kate, I think we lost Kate.
What happened?
Kate, we lost you. Did you have an internet connection disruption?
I must have. Yeah, I'm back though. Let me put that up again. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Yeah, now we can.
In addition to its historical significance, representing turn-of-the-century residential development of Bedford-Stuyvesant, it also has cultural significance, longtime home of a Masonic organization for American men, and has served as a community space. The proposed landmark site is the tax lot, with the two primary facades facing south onto Willoughby Avenue and west onto Nostrand Avenue. The house was prioritized as a potential individual landmark in a recent survey update of the neighborhood. In January of this year, staff responded to a request for evaluation of the building, noting that it may merit consideration for designation. The house is located in what is today at the northwestern corner of Bedford-Stuyvesant, in an area historically inhabited by the Canarsie, and under the Dutch occupation in the 17th century known as Cripplebush. The property on which the house would be built was located within Henry Borum's farm in the 19th century, which in 1855 became part of what is known as Brooklyn's Eastern District. Shown with a star on the 1898 atlas on the right, the house was constructed in 1897 to 98 on the corner of Willoughby and Nostrand. You can see the areas in this map, including Henry Borum's 1835 house, which was formerly located adjacent on Nostrand Avenue, and the outline of the former Cripplebush Road. Jacob Dangler was an Alsatian immigrant who became a successful meat packer and provisions merchant in Brooklyn, establishing a thriving business along Myrtle Avenue that afforded him the opportunity to build a home for himself and his family, a short walk from his business. To design the house, he hired Theobald Engelhardt, a prominent and prolific architect whose work can be found throughout Brooklyn, particularly in the neighborhoods of the former Eastern District. Engelhardt's many commissions included residences, banks, industrial and institutional buildings, and churches in a variety of styles. His residential work included the Katharina Lipsius House at 670 Bushwick Avenue and the Doring Bohack House at 1090 Green Avenue, both in Bushwick. And his industrial projects included the Ulmer Brewery, Empire State Dairy Company, and Eberhard Faber Pencil Company complexes, all of which are designated landmarks. In his design for the Jacob Dangler house, Engelhardt, who worked in a variety of styles, drew upon the Chateauesque style. This style, sometimes known as the French Gothic Revival, was popular at the time and incorporates details seen in 16th century chateaux of France, including prominent towers and embellished attic stories. While the best known American example is the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina by Richard Morris Hunt, the style was used in New York in a variety of residential buildings, from the Warburg Mansion, now the Jewish Museum on Fifth Avenue, and the Shuttleworth House in the Bronx, both designated landmarks. Also in row houses and apartments like 79 Decatur Street in the Bedford-Stuyvesant expanded Stuyvesant Heights Historic District, shown on the right. Set on a corner lot, the Dangler house is a fine example of the Chateauesque style. It's anchored at the southwest corner by a large circular tower with a conical roof with projecting parapet, and features an entry porch on the south facade, a bowed bay window, and a 1.5-story wing facing Nostrand Avenue. Gothic-inspired limestone and terracotta details embellish the brick-clad house. These include tracery at the porch and second-story parapet, window surrounds with applied label moldings and Tudor arched moldings topped with finials, and crockets and trefoil roundel at the gabled parapet facing Nostrand Avenue. Further visual effect is provided by the tall brick chimneys with quatrefoil embellished caps. Following Dangler's death in 1939, his survivors put the house for sale, and it was marketed for institutional use. Since 1954, when it was purchased by the Universal Grand Lodge, its most significant use has been to serve as a clubhouse for the lodge's predominantly women's auxiliary of the Oriental Grand Chapter, later the United Grand Chapter of the Order of the Eastern Star. The Order of the Eastern Star was founded in 1850 in Mississippi to share principles of masonry with women. For roughly 60 years, the order has been actively engaged in the Bedford-Stuyvesant community, hosting conferences, seminars, and fundraisers to provide scholarships for young African-American women. The organization also operated a food pantry from 441 Willoughby Avenue, and the building has served as an event and gathering space for the community. As you can see in this comparison with the circa 1940 tax photograph on the right, the house has very good integrity, retaining its distinctive architectural detail and Chateauesque decorative features. Alterations to the house include infill at the entrance porch and the addition of a 1-story utilitarian extension at the rear of the house, which is considered non-contributing. These alterations do not detract from the overall integrity of the fine architectural design, nor from its historical and cultural significance. As you recall, when the property was calendared, there was a demolition application under review by DOB, Department of Buildings. The United Chapter of the Order of the Eastern Star, who own the building, are in the process of selling it to a developer to redevelop the site. This year, we've made several attempts to speak to the Order of the Eastern Star, the United Grand Chapter. We weren't successful prior to calendaring. But since calendaring, we have spoken with them, and we have been talking to the potential purchaser about his plans for the site and potential for development on the vacant areas or in the portion of the non-contributing addition. 441 Willoughby Avenue's adaptation from a private home into a clubhouse for the Order of the Eastern Star reflects the architectural and cultural history of Bedford-Stuyvesant over the course of the 20th and 21st centuries. With its ornate Chateauesque style and prominent location on a corner site, the Jacob Dangler House has been a significant presence in the area for nearly 125 years. Thank you. That's the end of our presentation this morning.
Thank you, Kate. Commissioners, do we have any questions? Yes, Commissioner Gustafson, please go ahead.
Yeah, it looks like that you said there's a non-contributing addition. That's on Nostrand, right?
Yeah.
And it looks like the developable portion of the site is almost entirely in front of the building as opposed to the side, the rear. Am I right about that?
No, here, maybe I'll go back to the site map. There is a rather large side yard. If you can see, so the sort of the low one-story utilitarian building wraps around the north and east there in the back corner. So the historic building facing the corner has space around it at both of those sides.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Holford-Smith.
Just sort of further clarification. So the developable site is the L that wraps around the side and the two sides. So the development could be like an L that kind of wraps around the mansion.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe you can see it a little bit here. This on the right is the Nostrand side, and on the left is the Willoughby side. So you can see that piece.
And are there plans in place for development, or is it just in early discussions?
We understand it's an early discussion. I mean, the initial plan, as we understand it, was to demolish the building and redevelop the entire site. So we've been talking in hopes of finding a way to build an addition and to save the building.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Devonshire.
Sarah, it looks like that non-contributing addition overlaps the original building somewhat, actually encroaching into a window area. How would we deal with that? That's question number one. And question number two would be, how tall, as of right, could that L-shaped building be wrapping around this thing?
So I'll just answer the first question, then I'll ask Kate or Lisa if they know about what the zoning allows here. But if the commission votes to designate with the anticipation of a future application for an addition to redevelop the site, that future application would of course be subject to an application process here at the LPC and a public hearing and a certificate of appropriateness. And so, as with any application for an addition, we would have to evaluate what would be an appropriate size, scale, connection, how it connects and where it connects to the main building. So, as with any addition, we would look at those relationships to the historic building which the site is designated. And I don't know, Kate, if you have zoning information here.
And I don't at hand, I'm sorry.
Or Lisa.
I do. I don't really want to speculate on what could or could not be done under the zoning, but it is zoned R6A with a C24 overlay.
Well, without speculating, what would be allowed?
And what does that mean?
Commissioners, I think as the chair said, this would be subject to a C of A process, and you would be reviewing the appropriateness of an addition.
Regardless of what the zoning allows.
Yeah. There are many designated buildings where the zoning would allow something very large, and the landmarks law explicitly permits the commission to approve something that's smaller than what would be.
I have another question then. That addition subsumes one of the side walls of that house. Do we know if that entire original wall has been destroyed or if it is extant within that addition?
I think that would be information we would have to determine in an application process.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? All right, I don't see any other questions at this time. We do have a number of people who signed up to speak, so I'm going to turn it over to Sonia Gior to take us through the testimony portion of this public hearing.
Great, thank you. And so if all participants who wish to speak would please raise their hand in Zoom so that we can identify you. And then I'll be calling folks based on the signups that we received in advance, and then I'll go to anyone who has not yet been called. So the first participant today will be Councilmember Chiose. Councilmember, I'll be promoting you to panelist. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, good morning, everyone, to members of the commission, as well as neighbors and interested parties. My name is Councilmember Chiose. I'm here today to advocate for the establishment of official landmark status for the century-old Bed-Stuy landmark, the Jacob Dangler House on Willoughby. As this community's elected representative in the New York City Council, I understand the significance of the structure to rest on two pillars. One, its physical magnificence, and its role as a host to the community gatherings, events, and celebrations that make us whole and bind us together. Bed-Stuy is a neighborhood with roots both deep and revered. It is home to one of the oldest free Black communities in the United States, a status reinforced by its welcoming of Caribbean immigrants like my own great-grandparents. It is defined not just by the people who reside here, but also their shared experience in the culture we build and live together. Charitable events from backpack giveaways to necessary fundraisers are part of that culture. Holiday parties and dances are part of that culture. The celebrations of milestones from baby showers to prom to wedding receptions and back to baby showers all over again. These are all parts of that culture, parts that find home at the temple on Willoughby. The proud culture of Bed-Stuy is not just represented in this space, but facilitated by it. This alone would make it worthy of our protection. All this before mentioning its appearance and stature. Our neighborhood hosts the largest collection of Victorian architecture in the United States. These buildings give these streets character. Our space is not just a nameless, faceless collection of housing units. It is a neighborhood informed by our history, built by our people, and defined by that familiar feeling shared by generations of Black Brooklynites who walk these blocks. We're not here today simply to preserve the past. We're here to cherish our history and defend our right to live as its proud descendants. To own property is a legal designation, but we have an opportunity for the community to take ownership over a beloved space. 441 Willoughby is a landmark, and I urge this commission to make that landmark status official for our present community, for historic continuity, and for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Arlene Punnett. And Arlene, I'll be promoting you to panelist. And Arlene, if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Morning.
Thank you.
My name is Arlene Punnett, and I'm the present Grand Matron for United Grand Chapter. We as a community would have liked to preserve our home. We were forced to be moved simply because of financial problems. But the pandemic did not help us in any way. We understand that the community would like to keep this building as a landmark. However, the building is in such disarray that we're not sure they'll be able to keep it. They were not there to help us to keep the building. And so now that we've assumed the position to have the building sold for our survival, everyone now wants to keep the building. We are presently in a process of selling this building in order to meet all of our financial obligations, which we really cannot afford. It's millions of dollars. If there's a way that this building can be saved and also improved upon with housing around it, we would love to go that route, but it depends on the buyer and how he feels about it. We hate to use the historic value of the building. However, the building as is, if it becomes a landmark, it will not be sellable. It will not be able to be improved upon, and thus will become the biggest eyesore on Nostrand and Willoughby. My associate grand matron will be one of the speakers, and she will give you all the details. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Rachel Jones, and I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Rachel, you can defer to Celeste if you choose.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Jones. I am one of the members of United Grand Chapter, and I will be deferring to our Associate Grand Matron, Celeste Jefferson. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next speaker will be Valerie Portis. Valerie, I will be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, good morning. I'm sorry. My name is Valerie Portis. I'm currently the Board of Directors manager for the building, and I'm gonna pass mine on to our Associate Grand Matron also, Celeste Jefferson.
Okay, thank you. And Celeste Jefferson, you can speak next. I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record.
Good morning. I am Associate Grand Matron Celeste Jefferson from United Grand Chapter. I am a representative for the United Grand Chapter. I was wondering if I may make a request that if the buyers or the representative for the buyer, if he's present, I would like for him to speak before I actually make my presentation. If not, then I will continue on. Is that possible?
Sure, yes. Mr. Tomer Ehrlich, I'll be promoting you to panelist now.
Thank you.
Sure. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, good good morning. My name is Tomer Erdich, and I'm represented by my attorney. And if you don't mind, that he will speak with behalf of me.
Sure. If you could just share your attorney's name, please.
Eliad Shapiro.
Is he with you, Mr. Tomer, or do we need to bring him in separately?
I see him in the Zoom.
He registered and he's separately.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Shapiro, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please unmute your line, you have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning. Chair Carroll and Commissioners, I'll be reading into the record a letter that was sent on Mr. Ehrlich's behalf and his company, Brooklyn 360 LLC, yesterday. Dear Chair Carroll and Commissioners, our office represents Brooklyn 360 LLC, the contract vendee involved with the above referenced premises. This letter is submitted with regard to the above referenced premises, which is scheduled to be heard at the Landmarks Preservation Commission, July 12, 2022 public hearing. Brooklyn 360 strongly objects to the rushed calendaring of the premises for consideration as an individual landmark, as LPC 1 had prejudiced Brooklyn 360 by intentionally delaying the issuance of a status letter, which prevented Brooklyn 360 from receiving as-of-right permits at the New York City Department of Buildings, and 2, further prejudiced Brooklyn 360 by failing to provide adequate time for Brooklyn 360 to prepare materials for this July 12, 2022 public hearing. On April 8, 2022, Brooklyn 360 wrote to LPC staff requesting that the landmark status of 6 properties, including this premises. These status letters were necessary to apply for permits at DOB for the properties. 3 days later, on April 11, 2022, LPC issued the status letters for 4 out of 6 properties. On May 3rd, LPC issued the status letter for the 5th property. Because Brooklyn 360 still had not received the status letter over a month after the submission of the initial request, Brooklyn 360 made a follow-up request to LPC for a status letter for the premises. Finally, on May 24, 2022, LPC issued its status letter, noting that the premises was not landmarked. In response, Brooklyn 360 was finally able to submit a request for a demolition permit at the DOB on June 3rd, 2022. Then, on June 7, 2022, a mere 4 days later, the DOB intake form was rejected and LPC, at the last minute, scheduled and adopted a motion to calendar the premises as an individual landmark that same day. This intentional delay violates LPC precedent and bars Brooklyn 360 from proceeding with any as-of-right work on the premises. Brooklyn 360 would have had an extra 4 to 6 weeks to finalize its application and receive necessary permits. But instead, as the evidence will bear out, LPC intentionally delayed the status letter, and now Brooklyn 360 is left without recourse. LPC has rushed its review of the premises without due diligence and has provided minimal time and information to Brooklyn 360 regarding the potential landmark status, resulting in the inability of Brooklyn 360 to research the merits of the proposed action. At the June 7th hearing, LPC staff noted that they could not share much about the property, and they would try to get the information necessary for presentation by the time of the public hearing today, even though they had previously determined that the premises did not warrant individual landmark status in prior surveys. By preventing Brooklyn 360 adequate time to retain an architect, Brooklyn 360 will not be able to fully present a detailed response at this July 12, 2022 hearing, contrary to customary practice. We respectfully request that LPC adjourn the proposed hearing on this matter to a later date, and this letter does not serve as an opinion on the merits of the landmark designation. That concludes the letter. I will also add, for the record, that in discussions with that I will also add that the developer, my client, has been willing to build affordable housing on the site and has also been willing to give the communities to give a community center a significant amount of square footage for a significant duration of time, which should be stated on the record. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Jefferson, I'll be bringing you back in. I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and begin speaking, we'll be all set. Ms. Jefferson, are you able to unmute your line?
So sorry.
No problem.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Good morning. I am here to speak on behalf of the United Grand Chapter, the owner of 441 Willoughby Avenue, in opposition to the request for landmark status for the property. We are a charitable organization under the New York Not-for-Profit Corporation law. This building was formerly used as a meeting place for our organization and as a catering hall. During our residence there, the building started to deteriorate and our ability to generate income was steadily declining. It became more and more difficult to maintain the upkeep of our building. We could not book enough affairs to generate income sufficient to sustain operations of the building. Once COVID hit, it truly destroyed our finances. With our financial situation and our rising indebtedness, our only recourse was to sell the property. We would love to be able to keep the building. However, at this time, we're not financially able to do so. Accordingly, we are in contract to sell the property to Mr. Tomer Eldridge. The old saying is, with great power comes great responsibility. Although this commission has the power to designate this property as a landmark, you should seriously consider the dire consequences that will result if you do so. It would be an absolute disaster for us if 441 Willoughby Avenue becomes a landmark location. Although we cannot speak for him, there's a strong possibility that our buyer will abandon the sale. If you make it impossible to develop the property, our buyer will be put in an untenable position. If he completes the sale, he will have invested millions of dollars to buy a property that he won't be able to develop. If he decides to abandon the sale, we will be forced into litigation and to try and recover the purchase price with no guarantee of success. In such an event, you will have destroyed our sale and we will lose our building. That will truly be a taking without just compensation. We cannot afford to pay the mortgage and maintain the building. Our fear is that if the property is landmarked, no one will want it because they will not be able to do anything with the building. The building is already in decay, which will only get worse over time with mold, rat infestations, and become a further eyesore to the neighborhood. The result will almost certainly drive our organization into bankruptcy. In our opinion, the neighborhood would be better off with a new development, new lifestyle, and new possibilities for the property. If a landmark status is granted, it will create a blight on the neighborhood with a ramshackle building on the corner of Nostrand Avenue and Willoughby Avenue that no one will want. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Evelyn Collier from Brooklyn Community Board 3. And I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, my name is Evelyn Collier. I'm the chair of Landmark and Preservation Committee representing Community Board 3. This is a resolution that I'm to read. supporting the landmark designation for the Jacob Danler House, 441 Willoughby Avenue. We thank the commission for the calendaring of this item that happened on June 7th, 2022. We thank the research committee for doing further study on this building. This is a building that was built for Jacob Danler. The Gothic Revival Mansion sits on the prominent Willoughby Avenue corner. Among many neo-Greek brownstone, Mr. Dangler was a successful provision merchant and banker. He owned a meatpacking business located on nearby Myrtle Avenue. Immigrating to the United States from Europe as a teenager, Mr. Dangler was a Brooklynite for 70 years, as a well-known in the civically engaged member of the community. He was president of the board of St. Peter's Lutheran Church, on the board of Fulton Savings Bank, and the German Evangelical Home for the Aged, and the Wilmsburg Hospital. He lived in his home on Willoughby Avenue until his death in 1939. At age 87, the home was put up for sale in 1941. 1943, the house was served as Willow Temple, a lodge of the Knights of Pythias. 1967, the Oriental Grand Chapter of the Eastern Star, a Masonic organization, purchased the building, home to numerous functions over the year, including Block Association meetings, political events, educational classes, and social events. The building became an important gathering space for the African American community in Bedford-Stuyvesant. Due to financial circumstances, the building was recently put up for sale and is under threat of demolition. Local neighbors have rallied to prevent the demolition and restore the building as a space for community use. Their collective efforts have raised awareness about the building and made its priority before the commission. An individual landmark for 441 Willoughby will prevent demolition, allow opportunity to restore the building and preserve it for future and ongoing common community use. Therefore, be it resolved, Brooklyn Community Board 3 stands with residents and preservationists and call on the Landmark Preservation Commission to designate the Jacob Dangler House located at 441 Willoughby Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, 11206, as an individual landmark. Anthony Busseret, Chair, Brooklyn Community Board 3, Evelyn Collier, Chair, Landmark and Preservation Committee, CB3. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Lauren Cowdrey, and I'll be promoting you to panelists now. If you could please accept. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello. Hi, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lauren Caudry. I'm the Vice President of the Willoughby, Nostra, and Marcy Block Association, and I'm here in support of landmarking. About 6 months ago, neighborhood chatter began to circulate about the private sale and plans for demolition of our beloved building. What started as an inquiry has evolved into a real education in local politics, government agencies, and grassroots organizations. I've been connected with so many individuals who are so passionate about preserving vital parts of New York City and have lent their knowledge, experience, and guidance in this process, which has ultimately led me here today. So thank you everyone who has invested their time for the cause, and to the LPC for their consideration. The clear intention of the developer is to demolish this building and replace it with a 40+ unit apartment building with a promise of affordable housing and underground parking lots. And we're here to try to make a plea for that not to happen. The temple has been a welcoming place to gather, celebrate, and mourn in this community for over 60 years. It's also functioned as a weekly food pantry for neighbors most in need and provided a lush green space with its beautiful and bountiful gardens. From day one, we've tried to include the United Grand Chapter in this dialogue. All attempts were ignored. If the organization was struggling so much financially, why did they not reach out to the community that they've had a relationship with for over 60 years and ask for help? We were not informed, and without hesitation, we would have tried to help find solutions and funding. Surely demolishing such a magnificent building should be a last resort, not a first option. On Sunday, July 10th, at a last-minute request from the developer and the current owners, we met at the building site to hear what they had to say. We were given an ultimatum that day. If we choose to not go through with landmarking, they will designate a space for community events. with 1,000 square feet being the initial proposed square footage. If it is landmark, then we made a big mistake. That's them quoting, and they will not honor giving any space to the community and will build as much around the building as possible. I'm here to say on behalf of myself and my block that we will find another space to meet, but we will not find another structure like this one. Our community and our elected officials for our district showed up in great numbers that day on very little notice and on a Sunday no less, to listen and then to give our clear response that we do not want to see this building demolished, and we will do everything that we can to prevent that from happening. Should this building not be landmark, we want the developer to know that we will be watching every step of the way. From the building site safety to every draft of the design plans, we will be there. We've already had illegal work being done by them shut down, so much so that 311 stopped taking requests on the matter when we called a few months ago about unpermitted work happening in the building. The environmental impact of demolition, as well as the threat to the foundations of our homes, will be significant. We sit between two elementary schools and a soon-to-be yeshiva, and we won't have our kids breathing in asbestos and lead paint dust. We urge the developer to consider a figure in abandoning this project and moving on. Should that be an option, we hope to work with anyone who realizes the true value of this property beyond the land that it sits upon. There's so much potential here once the right people get involved. There are many organizations who are preserving and restoring buildings all over the city and giving back in the process. The sale of 441 Willoughby was never made public. Perhaps a community-minded nonprofit would have loved to take over such a significant building had the opportunity been made available. And let us remember that there is a potential for revenue here. It's a rentable venue that was booked every weekend and for months in advance pre-pandemic. This is not just a parcel of land. It's a representation of something built to last, constructed with materials designed to stand the test of time and to be enjoyed for generations to come. It's a structure that doesn't plan to go anywhere anytime soon, much like my community. I've lived in Bed-Stuy for 11 years, which is a blip compared to some of my neighbors who have spent their lives here. And I feel so privileged to get to live amongst these magnificent brownstones. When the sun sets in the evening, when the sun sets in the evening, Willoughby Avenue becomes illuminated in a warm glow. Neighbors sit on their stoops to greet each other. Birds chirp in our large trees. Bees buzz in the gardens that we have so diligently maintained. And people walk by in awe and admiration of our beautiful block. With a large light blocking apartment complex going in at the end of the street, we stand to lose all of that. Thank you so much for considering saving this irreplaceable and integral part of local history.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Kenneth Lewis. And Kenneth, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. Looks like actually Kenneth Lewis is not in the meeting. So therefore, our next speaker will be Sharon Tomlinson. Sharon is not in as well. Brampton Tolbert will be our next speaker. I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Commission. This is Frampton Tolbert, the Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council. HCC is testifying today in support of designating the Jacob Dangler House as an individual landmark. HCC has been working closely with the community advocates for many months as they have fought to preserve the significant structure which provides a unique sense of place to this block and neighborhood. The property being proposed for designation is both an architectural and community anchor, occupying the corner of Willoughby and Nostrand Avenues in Brooklyn. Designed by the prominent architect Theobald Engelhardt for merchant Jacob Dangler, whose businesses were located nearby, the French Gothic mansion was built between 1897 and 98. The major mansion is a rarity in this corner of Bedford-Stuyvesant. Most of Dangler's compatriots built elsewhere in the area. The building figuratively anchors the block, which is filled with earlier intact row houses from the 1870s. While this era of history and the architectural design are significant, the family sold the house around 1940 to be adapted for other uses. This subsequent use creates additional historical and cultural significance as the longtime home of the United Grand Chapter, Order of the Eastern Star, a Masonic organization made up primarily of African-American women. Under the ownership of the Eastern Star, the building has been used regularly for neighborhood gatherings and special events for over 50 years by the residents of the block and the larger community. The advocates have done amazing work in lining up support and involving the entire community in discussions of how this building can be used going forward. At 12,000 square feet with a non-contributing addition, we believe there are many opportunities possible. We join the community in hoping this landmark remains the anchor it has long been to reflect the historical, architectural, and cultural significance it exemplifies. We urge you to designate the Dangler Mansion as an individual landmark. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Andrea Goldwyn from the New York Landmarks Conservancy. I'll be promoting you to panelist now, Andrea. If you could please state your name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Chair Carroll and commissioners. I'm Andrea Goldwyn, speaking for the New York Landmarks Conservancy. The Conservancy is pleased to join local advocates and elected officials to support designation of the Jacob Dangler House as an individual landmark. The picturesque Dangler House clearly merits designation for its architecture and history. Designed by noted architect Theobald Engelhardt, it's a fine example of French Gothic architecture. The house stands out as one of the grand corner mansions that anchor some blocks of Bedford-Stuyvesant, an area where row houses are much more typical. While there have been some alterations and the addition, it is largely intact in height, scale, massing, materials, and decorative elements. The Dangler House is already a contributing building to the Cripplebush Historic District, which is eligible for listing on the State Register of Historic Places. The Conservancy submitted documentation for the district to the State Preservation Office in 2008 based on earlier LPC study areas, and the SHPO determined it eligible that year. The house reflects the story of this neighborhood over its 120-year history. Dangler, the original owner, was an immigrant and prosperous merchant. Later, the building has been a clubhouse for 2 different Masonic organizations, most recently, as we've heard, for one with a mostly African-American and African Caribbean membership. And of course, it's also served as an active meeting place and as a food pantry. Concerns that this cornerstone of the community would be demolished have sparked the local advocacy effort to save it. We thank the Commission for bringing this designation forward and urge you to hold a vote quickly. And we'd be happy to discuss the Conservancy's technical and financial assistance programs with the owner. Thank you for the opportunity to express the Conservancy's views.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Latrice Jones. I'll be promoting you to panelist now. You could please accept that request. Latrice Jones, are you interested in testifying? Okay, I think we'll move on to the next speaker, which is Deborah Keys. I do not believe Deborah Keys is present. We'll move on to Suzanne Spellin. Suzanne, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning. My name's Suzanne Spellin. I'm an architectural historian, and thank you for this opportunity to testify. I first noticed the Jacob Dangler House at 441 Willoughby Avenue in 1983 when I moved to Bedford-Stuyvesant. 30 years later, as a columnist for brownstoner.com, I had the opportunity to research the building and write a history of the Dangler family and their mansion. When talk of landmarking the building arose, my research became the basis for the architectural and historic history of the building. It's a rare example of a French Gothic style designed by a prominent German-American architect, Theobald Engelhardt, and the facade retains most of its original detail. It was built for self-made millionaire Jacob Dangler, who came to this country with nothing and built a highly successful provisions business, manufacturing the processed meats we today call cold cuts. Jacob Dangler's factory and store were nearby. He had his house built here on the edge of this brownstone block so he could walk to work every morning at 5 a.m., which he did until his death at the age of 87 in 1939. During the 19th and early 20th century, Willoughby Avenue between Nostrand and Broadway was home to many of the Eastern District's successful German-American entrepreneurs who built large freestanding homes. Today, many of these homes, if they are still standing, have been altered beyond recognition. This house is a rare and amazingly intact survivor. The house was sold by the family 2 years after his death. The surrounding neighborhood was now a diverse neighborhood of Jewish, Irish, and African American people, and the blocks opposite the house were highly industrial. By 1967, the building was purchased by the Oriental Chapter of the Eastern Star, a Masonic organization. They saved the building by using it as a headquarters and event location for themselves and other Masonic lodges, as well as for the surrounding community, which by this time was predominantly African American. It was pretty much forgotten by the city and certainly by developers, but today Brooklyn's status as hot has made this large plot an attractive prospect. I strongly disagree that no one wants a landmarked building. There are countless examples of houses of this sort being repurposed and/or adapted within preservation standards, which can include an addition or an adjoining building. It just takes some imagination with developers and architects who value historic structures. In considering a building or neighborhood for landmarking, the LPC considers many criteria, including architectural importance, the architectural integrity of the submission, the historic and cultural significance, and community support. 441 Willoughby checks all those boxes. The community support for landmarking and saving the Dangler Mansion is strong and committed. Please honor the architecture and history of 441 and designate it an individual New York City landmark. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Silvana Tropea, and I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Silvana Tropea, are you able to unmute your line?
Yes, hello?
Great, thank you.
Sorry about that. Yes, my name is Silvana Tropea, and I am reading this statement on behalf of Edward Norton. Edward is a actor and filmmaker and has made nearly a dozen films in New York and has lived here for over 30 years. He was also one of the earliest advocates and fundraisers for the preservation and redevelopment of the High Line and has been heavily involved in affordable housing advocacy since the early 90s. He directed the New York film Motherless Brooklyn, which focused heavily on the destruction of historic minority neighborhoods in the Robert Moses era, and featured Willoughby Avenue specifically. He submitted this comment. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Landmarks and Preservation Committee of New York City. I am writing in support of the Willoughby Nostrand Marcy Block Association in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, in their effort to gain landmark status for 441 Willoughby Avenue. The film Motherless Brooklyn was for me a way to build a bridge from our city's past to our present. Indeed, for much of the creative community, the city itself, its landscape, its architectural contours and diversity is an incubator and generator of ideas, which entertain us, challenge us, and hopefully enlighten us when allowing us to take full measure of where we were and juxtapose that to where we are. While making Motherless Brooklyn in 2017 and 2018, we set out to recreate the New York of the late 1950s. We were challenged to capture the spirit of our historic neighborhoods, and it was very difficult to find contiguous areas of preserved historic character, especially in Brooklyn, due to rampant zoning variance and luxury development and lack of landmark preservation. Willoughby was really unique and consequently served as a lodestar to our creating a past long gone, but full of contemporary relevance and meaning. Much in the same way the old Penn Station did in our film. We could only recreate the old Penn Station through computer-generated imagery because the original structure had famously been demolished in 1960s. But the old Penn Station was enough of a city landmark to leave an image trail to assist in our recreation. Once a less prestigious building like 441 Willoughby is gone, it's gone from our site and from our historical record too. And our collective creative capacity is the poorer for it. I believe this house, which has served a shifting but significant purpose for over a century, should absolutely be viewed as not just a spiritual and aesthetic connection to the past, but as a major city asset which supports the creative production industry in New York City and beyond. Thank you, Edward Norton.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Aviva Davis. I'll be promoting you to panelists now. If you could please accept that request. Aviva Davis, are you interested in testifying? Okay, I think we'll move on to the next speaker, which is Deborah Young. Deborah Young, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning. My name is Deborah Young, and I am the co-founder and president of the Crown Heights North Association. I am writing on behalf of Crown Heights North Association today. I also want to note for the record that in view of the time allotted us, and I want to respect that, I am testifying a brief version of what has already been submitted. We are in total support of the landmark designation of 441 Willoughby Avenue in Brooklyn, the Jacob Dangler House here in Willoughby. A few of our reasons are as follows. The statuesque style 120-year-old mansion is an important piece of local architecture and history and needs to be preserved for years to come. Those who come behind us should be entitled to experience the architectural legacy of this structure. Willoughby also has a cultural significance due to its affiliation with the Order of the Eastern Star and as a neighborhood anchor. 441 Willoughby captures and represents the spirit of historic buildings in our communities. With the rampant rezoning and development, we are at risk of losing significant parts of our history. This building has served as a viable and valuable venue for the community and beyond for years. I am 70+ years old and have fond memories of attending weddings, anniversaries, and other social gatherings there since childhood. Willoughby had continued to avail itself to these type of community events. This building is a vital community asset. In closing, we urge the Landmarks Preservation Commission to designate this valuable and deserving piece of history. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Joanne Joyner-Wells. Joanne, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joanne Joyner-Wells, and I am a longtime resident of Willoughby Avenue. I am a homeowner and secretary of the Willoughby Nostrand Marcy Block Association. I speak this morning in support of landmarking 441 Willoughby, also known as the Jacob Dandler House, to save it from demolition. I would like to thank the Landmarks Preservation Commission and Community Board 3 for their support and for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of members of the block, as well as myself personally. 441's architectural style sets the tone as it is adjacent to a beautifully designed and well-maintained row of brownstone houses on both sides of the street. There are no abandoned houses on this block, and our residents, both old and new, have worked tirelessly to maintain this block and keep it as a viable living community and environment. We have an active block association, which has worked tirelessly. We have held many events at 441 Willoughby and in conjunction with the former residents of 441 Willoughby. We have honored our seniors on this block. We have honored those who have done the work. We have been very engaged with politicians around keeping this block and maintaining its beautiful environment. The Block Association met regularly in this venue. Actually, our records were stored at 441 Willoughby, and at no time were we notified that the building was about to be for sale. Our records were discarded. All of our history of the Block Association was discarded. And we are all here and we're able to reach everyone, and we have no idea why this happened. We are totally in support of landmarking 441 Willoughby. We ask that you think this through thoroughly. You understand the importance of community, you understand the importance of historical designation, and you understand the importance of just keeping things. I'm not against change. We're not against change, but we want everyone to understand that the beauty and architectural style of 441 Willoughby, it just sets the tone for this block, and we've worked very hard to preserve it. And we want you to consider that as you consider landmarking this. And so on behalf of the Block Association and everyone on this block that has worked so hard for this day to come, please consider landmarking 441 Willoughby Avenue. I thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Mark Brandoff, and I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Yes, good morning. My name is Mark Brandoff. I am the attorney for the United Grand Chapter. I would just like to add, because it was not put on the record, that the property is currently the subject of a foreclosure proceeding. And there is in excess of $2 million presently due and owing on that mortgage, which is being contested. But should this sale not go through because you landmark the property, or for whatever reason our purchaser decides that he can't go forward, we're going to wind up in bankruptcy. And at that point, I'm not sure what's going to happen to the building. So please consider that when you consider the application. Thank you. I have no further.
So our next speaker will be Christina Conroy from the Victorian Society. Christina, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, I'm Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society, New York. Now, 441 Willoughby is an outstanding and rare French Gothic building in this community. The house was designed by Theobald Engelhardt, the preeminent architect for German-American Brooklynites, especially in the old Eastern District areas of Williamsburg and Bushwick and the northern reaches of Bedford-Stuyvesant. Now, Engelhardt is also the architect for an individual landmark, the Empire State Dairy Company buildings at 2840 Atlantic Avenue. For the well-known builder, Henry Bruchhauser, the Dangler House was almost certainly his most prominent project. Now, in addition to the undeniable significance of this building, demolition permits for the mansion have been filed, but there are no plans or applications for new building permits filed with the Department of Buildings. So the possibility that this magnificent building will be senselessly demolished and remain a blighted vacant lot on the prominent corner of Bedford-Stuyvesant for years is very real. Now, we and the commission have all seen this reckless phenomenon throughout the city, and it should not be repeated here or anywhere else nearly 60 years after passage of the Landmarks Law, which was designated in part to prevent such wanton destruction. Now, Jacob Dangler, who commissioned the building, was rightfully proud of his mansion, as are the community and elected officials now. The LPC should also be proud of this built heritage and preserve it through landmark designation, a rarity in this neighborhood, with the closest designated building a half-mile away. The mansion was and remains a distinctive monument to hard work and resultant success, an important statement at the time of construction, at this time, and for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Becca Abayera, and I will be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Abalera. I'm a resident of the neighborhood, and I'm just here to show my support for the resolution to landmark the Jacob Dangler House. It would be a disappointment and disservice to the community not to landmark a key gathering and community space and allow it to fall to yet another developer whose affordable housing figures far exceed the actual median income of the area. Protecting this building with landmark status is a big step towards protecting our entire community. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Audrey Banks, and I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. Thank you. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning, everybody. Good to see everyone. My name is Audrey Banks. I am a resident of Bed-Stuy, and I'm also here to show my support of landmarking. I'm the director of All-in-One, a community-oriented building organization which specializes in adaptive reuse of historical and vacant buildings through the installment of community facilities, particularly in the arts and impact. We have opened facilities in similar landmark buildings of mansions in Clinton Hill and Fort Greene. We specialize in partnering with owners and developers to support upfront renovations costs and help maintain properties and upkeep of these historical structures while maintaining their community use of these much loved historical spaces. I and the organization that I represent really urge the Grand Chapter of the Eastern Star to consider organizations and alternative operations that are able to maintain and upkeep these structures. And also be able to maintain these spaces that are such a strong and personal pillar of the communities that they exist. A building of this size has great potential to become, I believe, stable financially and remain as a pillar of such for the community. So thank you for the consideration. And I do hope that a landmark status is possible for such a beautiful structure.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Jeff Charles Pierre. And I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning. I am Jeffrey Charles Pierre, a recent historic preservation graduate from the Pratt Institute School of Architecture Historic Preservation Master's Degree Program. I am representing the students, faculty, and administrators of our program at Pratt Institute. We are here today to support the designation of the Jacob Dangler House at 441 Willoughby Avenue in Bedford-Stuyvesant. The Jacob Dangler House is less than a mile from the Pratt campus and is an important part of our community. This is among the many reasons we strongly believe that the New York City Landmarks Commission should designate and protect this early 20th century French Gothic Revival building. The Jacob Dangler House site location is juxtaposition between new and proposed developments on DeKalb and Myrtle Avenues, and retail anchors such as Home Depot and Twain Reed. The building is of considerable architectural and historic significance and has been a community anchor for over 50 years. It represents a part of the African-American cultural heritage in the Bedford-Stuyvesant community. Designation as a New York City landmark will help elevate the significance of African-American culture, stories, and history in the Bedford-Stuyvesant community and Brooklyn. It will also be in lockstep with the National Trust for Historic Preservation African-American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, an initiative which protects places where significant African-American history happened. As you know, the Bed-Stuy community seeks to adapt the building into a community resource. Designation will greatly assist them in the goal by opening opportunities to finance and manage an appropriate redevelopment project that will preserve an important architectural icon and serve community needs. The students and faculty of Pratt's Historic Preservation Program hope to assist the community in this effort. Therefore, we urge the Commission to designate 441 Willoughby Avenue. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. And our next speaker will be State Senator Jabari Brisport. I'll be promoting you to panelist now. Please accept that request. Great. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I am a New York State Senator Jabari Brisport. I represent the area containing 441 Willoughby Avenue in Bed-Stuy. I'm coming here to speak in favor of its designation as a landmark location for multiple reasons. One, public safety is on a lot of people's minds, and restoring a historic part of the community with a chance to refurbish it as a continued community space, as a space to bring people together rather than drive them apart, is absolutely critical to public safety, and should be preserved on that grounds alone. But in addition to that, the building has a long history of being in the community, being a gathering space, and is a historic anchor in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and that should be acknowledged as well with its landmark designation. So thank you for giving me the time to speak, and I do hope the landmark designation goes through. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Assembly Member Stephanie Zinnerman. Assembly Member, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. Please accept that request. Great. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Assembly Member Stephanie Zinnerman, and I proudly represent the 56th Assembly District, which contains the historic neighborhoods of Bedford-Stuyvesant and Crown Heights. I want to begin my remarks today just thanking the community for their self-agency and their activism in preserving this wonderful landmark in our community. A place that's not only beautiful in its structure and facility, but certainly has been a space that we have created social movements for decades. This is a place that has housed our seniors, our Cub Scouts and our Girl Scouts, and of course, the Masons and the members of the Eastern Star. When you look at what has happened in Bedford-Stuyvesant and Crown Heights over the last decade or so, you know that 23% of our population, specifically the African-American population, has been displaced. Our community is landlocked at this point, and we need to preserve all of our spaces so that we can come together as neighbors and friends and family members to enjoy each other's company, to get to know each other, to have safe spaces for our children to actually play and grow and achieve. This would be a grave disservice to the community if we first tore down the building and then we just put up for a housing that would not be affordable for those who currently live in Bedford-Stuyvesant. And so I'm in full support of landmarking this space, but I also understand the plight of the Masons and the Eastern Stars. And I think that there are state resources. As a member of the Tourism, Arts, Parks, and Sports Development Committee, there are many resources available for landmark properties and for programming for community. And so I urge us to leave today with the mind that we can preserve this space, preserve the organization, preserve the facility for use for the public into the next century. So I'm in favor of this landmarking, and I urge us to just work together for a solution that is going to benefit all members of this community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our next speaker will be Michael Williams. Michael Williams, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. Michael Williams, are you interested in testifying today? Okay, I think we'll move on to the next speaker. We do have some other hands raised. We have a Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning, everyone. I am Kenneth Lewis, the president of the Willoughby, Nostrand, Marcy Block Association, in which 441 is a part of our block. The Willoughby Nostrand Block Association was established in the early 1950s by people in whom we have some that still live on this block. As the block association, it is not only just an average block in New York City, it is an award-winning block. We have won awards in the 80s and the 90s under Mayor Ed Koch, as well as Mayor Dinkins, for the beautification of our block, because we cherish our block that much. We've also, in the recent years, because we could not open back up the train station, we have been able to work with the MTA to do what's called rat mitigation and cleaning up in the area. We've supported all the homeowners that were on the block at times in which they had major needs, whether it was a fire or a flood. We started major projects just to help maintain the gardening at the other end of the block, the Red Gate Garden, so that we can have an open space and a garden where we can actually be a part of, and we can invite the community to work in the area. We've even in the building at 441, they have been meeting prior to my tenure, have been meeting there since the 60s and the 70s. They've been meeting in the building, joining with the community to create programs so that we could actually have outlets for our youth and for our children and for the seniors that are in our community. We've even introduced the organization to the 79th Precinct and the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, the fire department, who have all came there at one point in time to support the organization, as well as to use the facility to run events that would help them to raise finances for activities within the community. I want to share with you something. Prior to me becoming the president of the Block Association, I became a pastor working in the building itself. While working in the building, the youth that used to come there to be a part of our services, they used to always say the castle, not understanding what I was a part of and where I was at that particular time. One day, my son brought me out when I said, "What is the castle?" They brought me outside and they told me, he said, "Dad, take a look at the building." And when I looked at the building, I understood why all the kids were calling it the castle, and they were excited to go to this castle. And so for many years, this pillar, this entity, this building has been such a great avenue for our community. I want to say a quote from Morgan Muncy, an architectural historian and researcher for the Bedford-Stuyvesant Society for Historical Preservation, in an article in the Patch posted in February the 6th, 2011. He stated this. He said, "The properties in Bedford-Stuyvesant is like having a Van Gogh in your attic and not knowing about it." I want to state how the Block Association feel about this property. The Jacob Dangler House is our Van Gogh, made with the French Gothic limestone. It beautifies our corner. We respect it and we want to preserve it for generations to come. Therefore, as the president of the Willoughby Nostrand Block Association, Marcy Block Association, we have voted, and unanimously we voted to save this beautiful building and to preserve our community for the future generations. That is all I have to say, and I yield back to the board.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Jamela Swift. And Jamela Swift, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jamela Swift. Can you hear me?
Yes, but you do have a strong echo.
Okay, because I'm going through the phone, so should I hang up the phone? I'm also.
Yes, it's probably best if you have just phone or just computer.
Okay, let me think. Okay, now can you hear me?
Much better.
Okay, yes, hi. My name is Jamela Swift. I'm a member of Bedford-Stuyvesant. I'm also a community board member. Now, I am definitely a proponent of the building being landmarked. I think it would be prime as a museum because there's so many people that have come from Bedford-Stuyvesant that have gone on to make magnanimous contributions to society. So I don't know how we would go about having that done, but please, reconsider this as an option. And then 2, I have a question for the person who is hoping to buy the property. Will this property be accessible to all of Bed-Stuy? Now, I know you're saying that your goal is to build affordable housing, but will everyone be able to purchase there? I'm just noticing that there are a lot of buildings going up in northern Bedford-Stuyvesant that are designated solely for the Hasidic community. And I just would love to see if this happens, if you do build, affordable housing, I hope that everyone will be able to live there. Me as a Black woman, white people who live in Bed-Stuy who practice all different faiths, everyone. I would hope that it would be a culturally diverse building. So can the developer answer that question, please?
If you could, if that's the rest of your testimony, then we'll move on to the next person, but the developer has already spoken. So we can't have any other contributions from them. Is that the conclusion of your testimony? Okay.
Sounds like it.
I think we'll move to the next speaker, which is Paula Lipoy. And I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Paula Lipoy, and I am a member of the Willoughby Nostrand Marcy Block Association and a resident of this block. I wrote in testimony, but also wanted to speak to a specific point that we've been hearing from the developer and other representatives, that the development of 441 Willoughby would create affordable housing. Over the last 20 years, and more specifically in the last 5 to 10 years, you cannot walk 4 blocks in any direction of 441 Willoughby and not see rampant high-rise construction. And yet this neighborhood has lost longtime residents because the area is no longer affordable, and also due to predatory lending practices. Construction to mitigate an affordability crisis in Brooklyn is clearly not the solution, and yet we keep turning to it as a talking point. To burden a single historic building with solving housing affordability is not only unfair, it is unrealistic. We've been told by various entities that trying to preserve and landmark 441 Willoughby was hopeless, and that if we did go forward with landmarking, all would be lost, and we would get nothing by the way of community use. I just want to say that if those who have spearheaded and supported this small movement had taken heed to those warnings, we would not be here today having this conversation. For many residents on this block and in this area, the hope does not rest solely with us. 5 generations of my own family have been able to call this block home, purchased with the hope of something better, housing family and friends, sharing rooms and kitchens in order to keep these homes. And they were purchased at a time when nobody wanted to live here. So for many of us, we're not only carrying our hope, but the hope and the fight of those who got us here 50 to 80 years ago. Please recognize 441 Willoughby as not only a visual and architectural gem and landmark, but as an anchor that also preserves the history and relationships of a community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I do not see any other signups. Oh, there is one additional hand raised, Sakia Dorset. I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, my name is Sakia Dorset. I'm representing the 300 Bainbridge Block Association and the film I Love Bed-Stuy. When I moved here over 15 years ago, it was because of the culture of community, which is unique because of the low density brownstones with beautiful stoops. It's what Jane Jacobs calls the ballet of the sidewalk. You sit on your stoop, you're able to connect with your neighbors, you're able to connect with each other. Unfortunately, developers like Brooklyn 360 and specifically Thomas Elkridge is ruining that. High rises are thrown up with a focus on commerce rather than community, under the lies of affordable housing. And I want to be clear that community is not just about the people. It is about history. 441 is that history. I've watched with my camera for over a year as the neighbors of 441 Willoughby have fought not just for a building, but for their lives. They are fighting to keep a culture where you know your neighbor, one that a large building does not bring. They are fighting for peace of mind, one that may be thwarted by years of development, years of demolition, rats, rodents, debris, pests. They are fighting for safety. I was on there the day that the developers put up the scaffolding. There were 2 men haphazardly carrying iron, huge pipes across the sidewalk. There were no cones in sight. There was no safety. And as they have stated, there was no permission. This is what 441 Willoughby will be faced with if we move forward with not landmarking 441 Willoughby. They will be thrown into chaos. A beautiful, beautiful block will be thrown into chaos. Demolishing this building will destroy and demolish history. I recently interviewed Joanne, a long-term block member, who showed me photos of her grandmother getting married at 441 Willoughby, and then her herself getting married at 441 Willoughby. There is so much history in this building. There is so much history that will be lost if we throw up another box. During the documenting of Sunday's meeting, I was flabbergasted when the developer stated that the minimum amount of community space that he may provide was 1,000 square feet. 1,000 square feet. That is maybe what, a bare apartment? You're talking about a whole block, and 1,000 square feet is what he proposed? We cannot trust what this developer said. If you look up his name, there are numerous violations, pests, rodents, water leaks. There is a history since 2001. This is just another moment where, unfortunately, and it breaks my heart to say it, my people are being taken advantage of because of desperation, because they do not have enough resources, because they do not have the money to hold on to this building. So again, LPC, this is your moment. This is your moment to save history. This is your moment to be on the right side of it. This is your moment to protect the neighbors of Nostrand Willoughby Block Association. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I do see that Jamila Swift, you have your hand raised again. And so I will note that people can only testify once, but I think maybe there was some confusion with your time. So if you have anything to add to your testimony, oh, looks like your hand is, oh, it's back up. So if you have anything, a brief to add to your testimony from previously, then that's okay. Okay, your hand's down again. All right. So I don't see any other hands raised, and there are no other speakers on the list. So I will note that we received a number of letters, 71 letters in support and 2 letters in opposition. And so I will turn it back to you, Chair Carroll.
There is an additional hand.
Yes.
From R. Jones.
That person also already spoke.
Okay.
So I think we should be good to go.
Great, thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone who participated in our public hearing today and testified. And I also want to acknowledge another person who believed that the public hearing was in person and traveled to our offices at 1 Center Street. And she is, thanks to our wonderful staff in the office, she has been set up and is watching the hearing from our offices. But she did want us to note that her name is Margaret Ross, and she supports designation. And she wanted us also to note that she is 94 years old and came from Brooklyn to 1 Center Street in an access a ride to support her community and to support designation. So we're, I'm just, want to acknowledge her commitment to this process and to her community. So we'll mark down Margaret Ross for the record and thank her for joining us today, as well as everybody else who spoke. I think if commissioners, if there are no other questions, we'll just move to close the hearing today, and we will absorb everything we've heard. We will continue to speak to the owners and the potential purchaser, and we will bring this item back for a vote very shortly. Okay, Commissioner Holford-Smith, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the hearing is closed. Thank you everyone again for participating today, and we will be in touch and let you know when we are scheduling our next public meeting. Thank you. And we will now move to our Preservation Department agenda, starting with the public meeting items, many of which are items that were read into the record on June 28th, and we will be hearing for the first time today. And so we will be taking testimony. And I'll turn it over to Corey Harala, our Director of Preservation.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. We'll start today's Preservation Department agenda with public meeting item number 1, LPC 22-09733. This is an application for a binding report in the Borough of Brooklyn, Block 25, Lot 1, Water Street, the Marine Fireboat Station in the Fulton Ferry Historic District. This is a fireboat station building built in 1926, and the application is to install signage. This was read into the record at the public hearing of June 28, 2022, but no testimony was taken at that time, and the presentation was not given at that time. So we'll be seeing it for the first time today.
Hey, commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing. Brian, you now have control of the presentation. You just need to click on your screen. Great, and you can start at any time.
Okay, and just before we do, let's open the proceedings. Commissioner Bland, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Jefferson, would you second that motion?
So second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? And actually, we're opening, just a correction, we're opening the hearing, not the proceedings today, because this is one of the items read into the record. Okay, please go ahead.
All right, good morning, commissioners. Brian Blazak, preservation staff. As Corey said, the subject property is the Marine Boat Fire Station pictured here, and this is an application for signage. This slide locates the property at the end of Old Fulton Street within the Fulton Ferry Historic District in here. This building has a history of varied uses as shown in the historic photos of the fire station. The original use as a fireboat house, seen here from the air with the elevated train line still standing behind it, and a historic view looking towards the river. This photo from circa early 1970s shows the signage present on the building during its time of use as the Fulton Ferry Museum. And most recently, signage present during the use of the building as the Brooklyn Ice Cream Factory. The proposed signage is located on the south-facing facade and will be most visible from the green arrows shown here, these two. And as shown here between the first and second stories of the building and attached to the facade. On the upper left here, there is a flag for the business at the existing flagpole here. So that can be seen from the west looking east. And there are two proposed gooseneck lighting fixtures for illumination. This sign shows the details and dimensions of the signage. And lastly, Sarah Hummel from Ample Hills is here to talk to you briefly on the proposed signage material and lighting, and can answer any questions you might have. Sarah, if you could just unmute yourself and give your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Sarah Hummel. Thank you for having me today. We are a Brooklyn-based ice cream company, and we love the fact that we are in this location. And we are asking that we just have signage so people know that we're there. And we're proposing our logo being on the side of the building. And the reason why we chose this side is just because of the trees on the other side. And also for those coming down that bike path, they can see that we are there to offer the community great, delicious ice cream. And we did ask that this sign be illuminated just because we are a dessert company that majority of our sales are after dark. And what we've noticed is that a lot of people don't know that we're there. So I ask the committee to grant this proposal.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, do we have any questions? Yes, Commissioner Gustafson, please go ahead.
Two questions. One is on this view, the rendering has the lighting fixtures actually blocking the sign. Should I assume that that in reality those lighting fixtures will be slightly higher, or the sign will be slightly lower, so the sign's not obscured?
That's correct. So if you kind of see, it's hard just from this particular image, but if you see, it is the bottom of those goosenecks are actually above the lettering, so as not to block.
Okay, and the second thing is, what's the material of the sign itself?
I believe that the sign itself is, yeah, here we go. It is listed on here, HDU with PVC letters.
It's a plastic material. I think it's high density urethane, some sort of polymer.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you. And we chose this material for to make it easier to clean. So that way, this area, there's this black grime that tends to be on our side of our building. So we do our best to maintain that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Commissioner Chapin. Commissioner Chapin? Commissioner Chapin, you're still muted if you can just unmute. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I was asking whether
let's
if
turn off
the
one
sign
of
could be on the shed.
Okay, so the question is, can the sign be on the shed? And do you mean the portion that bumps out here on the side? Okay.
So yeah, so we did consider that. We found that it is a little bit lower. So for those coming down the bike path right in front of Hotel 1, it's difficult for them to see, and so we found that this area would be the most visible for the community to see that we are indeed an ice cream place.
Yeah, and the signs over time have always sort of been in this zone between the first and second floors, probably for the
Thank
same
you.
reason. Okay, other questions? All right, so I don't see any other questions. Let's see if we have anyone here to testify on this item. If you would like to speak on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you. And I will turn it over to Sonia Gior to take us through any testimony.
Thank you. So we do have a sign up, Helen Freeman from the Historic Districts Council, and I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, my name is Helen Freeman from Historic Districts Council. HDC believes that a single white lamp is the appropriate level of lighting on this facade and will better blend in with the building. Thank you.
Thank you. So we do not have any other speakers signed up, and I'm not seeing any hands raised. So I'll note that Brooklyn Community Board 2 recommends approval with a requested condition that black metal fabrication be used for the gooseneck lights to better aesthetically balance the overall presentation and to reduce visual distraction on the pier. So I'll turn it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have, I think, have heard in the testimony issues only related to the color and finish of the gooseneck lights. So I'd like to turn to the applicant and ask if you'd like to respond to those comments and what your thinking was about the finish that is proposed for these fixtures?
Sure. So previously it was suggested for that to be black, and then I'm hearing also white. We would go by with whatever the committee asks us to change that. We're not set on one color.
Okay. All right, commissioners, do we have any final questions? All right, I'm starting to unmute you all so we can close the hearing and begin our discussion. So Commissioner Jefferson, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
A motion.
Thank you. And Commissioner Lutfi, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, hearing is closed. And we'll begin our discussion. And as we've seen that there has, over time, this building has been used in different ways, and there has been signage on the facade sort of at this height. And so before us is the location on this particular facade, its size, scale, and materials, and the fixtures above. So Commissioner Bland, would you like to start this one?
Sure. I think you've noted that signage has been a part of this building's history for a long, long time. And the uses have changed over time as well. So the signage has responded to those uses. I think this location is the right location. I have no problem with the color of and the number too of the light fixtures. I think it can be repaired if this sign and this lights ever need to go away easily. And my only concern is the nature of the material that's being suggested. And I would say that given this wood building and its long history, that it should be either a metal sign or perhaps a wood sign that's painted.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lutfi?
I completely agree with Fred about the materiality. Otherwise, the sign is very, it's not oversized. It fits well with the building and is consistent with the past.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Jefferson?
Yes, the sign seems to be of appropriate scale. It fits in with the proportion of the building. The material of the sign, the plastic, I would prefer see metal. I can approve this.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Gustafson?
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Bland's comments.
All right, Commissioner Holford Smith?
Yes, I agree. I don't think that the plastic is appropriate, but I think otherwise the application is appropriate. So metal or wood, I think would be better for the sign.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chapin?
I agree with Commissioner Bland's comments.
Commissioner Goldblum?
Me too.
And Commissioner Devonshire?
I do as well.
Okay, great. So I think we have a consensus here. And so I'll go ahead and read that motion. In the matter of docket number 22-0933, 1 Water Street, Marine Fire and Boat Station in the Fulton Ferry Historic District, a fire boat station built in 1926. This is an application to install signage. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Fulton Ferry Historic District. And I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the location of the signage at the building has changed over time, and therefore the proposed signage location will be in keeping with the very prior sign placement at the building, that the signage and light fixtures are modest in size, simple in design, discreet in location, and will not call undue attention to themselves or damage any significant architectural features, and that the work will not detract from the special architectural and historic character of the building or the historic district. However, I recommend that the material of the sign be changed to painted wood or metal. Okay, Commissioner Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 9 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
All right, so that's approved, and please continue to work with the staff on the materials, looking at a wood or metal, and we'll move to the next item.
And the next item is public meeting item number 2, LPC 22-04320, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Queens, Block 1444, Lot 48, 34-41 83rd Street in the Jackson Heights Historic District. This is an Anglo-American garden home style house designed by Pierce L. Keysweater and built in 1928 to 29. The application is to legalize the installation of a fence without LPC permits. This was read into the record at the June 28th, 2022 public hearing, but is being presented today for the first time, and the staff will do the presentation after we open the hearing.
Good morning, Commissioners. Katie Rice, Landmark staff.
Katie, can you hang on just one moment? I'm going to open the hearing first, just so we can have a seamless transition between you and the applicant. So Commissioner Lutfi, would you make a motion to open the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is open. And so Katie, you may go ahead, and then the applicants may speak right after that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Good morning, Commissioners. Katie Rice, Landmark staff. 3441 83rd Street is located between 34th and 35th Avenues in the Jackson Heights Historic District. The proposal is to legalize an areaway fence. Historically, the buildings in Jackson Heights had open areaways, but many of the properties were altered prior to designation, and on this block, about half of them were. So the applicant has provided some examples. This is their property here. Sorry. So it's an open areaway fence, no wall, but the applicant has provided other examples along the block. And other examples in the general area. Some of them have a wall beneath, and the commission actually approved the item 6 here at a public hearing previously. So this is something the commission previously approved and reviewed. So on this block, there are a total of 25 houses. 9 have altered condition at the time of designation. 9 have illegally altered conditions for the areaways, and 2 have commission approvals. These are some other examples of conditions on the block, just to have more context. And this map should provide more context. Our property is the yellow property there. The notation is for wall and fence, or wall and posts. If it's green, it was existing at designation. If it's red, it was illegally installed. And the 2 blue locations were approved by the commission. The applicant is here to answer any questions, as well as myself.
Okay, thank you. So the 2 commission approved ones were a fence atop a low brick wall, or a low wall.
It wasn't a short wall, but it was maybe about 10 rows of bricks or so.
All right, commissioners, do we have any questions? Yes, Commissioner Lutfi. just accept the request.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's
So
okay.
I'm just a little interested within the context of those other illegal fences. Have any of them been shown in this presentation as conditions that are, that are being referenced in terms of being similar?
So the approved fence and wall I pointed out, and on the opposite side of the block, there are many more conditions that were existing at the time of designation. Let me see if I can show you the approved conditions. So these were existing at the time of designation here in slide 17. I believe also in slide 18, these were mostly existing at designation. So low walls.
So page 8, for example, where we see a whole line of fences that are similar to what's being proposed. Were they existing conditions, or are they just all illegal? Did we approve any of these?
These are illegal conditions.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, other questions? Yes, Commissioner Jefferson.
What makes them illegal? Are they sitting on a post, on a base? Are they going all the way down to the ground? What's the difference between legal and illegal?
The difference between legal and illegal is whether or not they obtained a permit in advance of installation.
Okay.
So there are some fences that were installed prior to designation, some fences that were installed after designation, but without a permit, and those have violations. And
Okay.
no one has evaluated the merits to date. And then there are the applications the commission has reviewed.
Thank you.
I mean, the installations the commission has reviewed.
Thank you.
And then often, when we look at fences particularly in this historic district, but in others as well, we do look at that context to understand how many were installed prior to designation and therefore have the right to stay. And that might be create a context that might lead a different approach. Depending on how many are legal and able to stay in place.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, I think we'll move to public testimony. If you're in the meeting and would like to speak on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you, and I will turn it over to Sonia Gior to take us through the testimony.
Great, thank you. So we do not have any advanced signups for this item, and I'm not seeing any hands raised. So I will note that Queens Community Board 3 recommends approval. I'll turn it back to you, Chair Carroll.
All right, thank you. All right, and I just wanted to see if the applicant wanted to make any final statements before we close the hearing and begin our discussion.
I would like to.
Please.
We appreciate Ms. Rice's help throughout this process. There are a few things. My wife, whose career before was as a historic preservation architect of civic structures. When we moved in, the fence had already been installed. We spoke to our long-term neighbors who told us, you notice the fences are contiguous. They all decided together for security reasons that they needed some kind of barrier between what is public space and private space, because people were treating those lawns like a public park, not just in polite ways, but in less polite ways. And that included coming in and drinking, literally kids drinking in the spaces between the house, people urinating and defecating in the behind the protected, the protection of the plantings that everybody had there. And they decided this was the safest thing. They also, if you see, they created something that is very much in the context. If you look at, for instance, if we can see the picture of the towers, which is one of the original historic structures in the neighborhood, the fence is almost identical to what they have. It's very low scale, and because there's a slight rise in front of our home, the scale doesn't even obscure the lowest course of bricks on our home. It's very much in keeping with the neighborhood. It's wrought iron, it's painted black. They're all contiguous intentionally to try and fit in. These were created years before we purchased the property. We were very excited to move in 2011. And we're told that these were installed sometime in the mid-90s. I don't know why the process wasn't followed to the letter or of the requirements, because of course that long precedes us, and our neighbors nobody here is really a particularly sophisticated person, but they installed something that they felt was in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. The community board unanimously agreed that it was not an egregious addition, that it did look like it fit in. And it's very important to us, everything we've done with our home, which we love dearly, everything we've done is about maintaining the character, going so far as when we had to replace spindles in the interior staircase, my wife wouldn't settle for the commercially available ones. She had them custom made to exactly match the original spindles. So she's dedicated the love of this home, and the appreciation for its position in the neighborhood is deep. And she was very committed, and she felt very strongly and was very surprised to find that this was not done and was not something that had been original, because it was so carefully done to fit in. So I'd just like to say that, we have nothing but respect for the neighborhood, for the historic character. We appreciate the historic designation because we feel it protects us from changes in the neighborhood that would diminish the character of the neighborhood. We do not feel this minor change of a roughly 24 inch fence that goes right from the ground. We don't feel this in any way detracts from the historic character. And we feel it would be far worse to either rip them out piecemeal, because we're the only guys who have gone through this process on the block. I think most of our neighbors were too intimidated to try and do this. So to start ripping them out piecemeal would be a disaster, not only for the protection of the homes, but for the look of the neighborhood itself. And we just feel strongly that it's in everybody's best interest that these fences be approved as the local community board did unanimously. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you. All right, commissioners, do we have any final questions for the owner? All right, I am going to then, oh yes, we have one more. Commissioner Devonshire, please go ahead. Just accept the request to unmute.
What do we now tell the homeowners who followed the rules and followed the regulations when they put their fences in?
So who is that? Are you is that a question to me or to the staff?
That's to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think we have to have our discussion here, but as I said, and I can sort of lead, as we start our discussion, I can talk about the history of our.
Sarah, well, why don't we close the hearing and then we can have the discussion.
Okay, let's do that, because this is really getting to the discussion more than questions for the applicant.
Wait, can I add one last thing then before we go?
Yes.
One of the fences that was made legal recently, that was shown as a corner condition, initially they had installed hideous chrome metal 6-foot-high fences around their entire property. And it was only because of the historic, that's the towers that I referred to before. They had installed this one, go back one.
Back one, yeah.
This guy on the bottom, they were high, hideous chrome fences. And, yes, they went through the process and made it legal, but not because they applied. They went through the process because somebody enforced the rules, and that was not in character in any way. The other fences, near as we can tell, nobody applied to get anything approved. The other fences existed at the time of the designation of the historic district. It's not like 4 people on the block properly applied for the low wrought iron fences and 4 people on the block did not. And the 4 people who followed the rules are upstanding citizens. The 4 people who didn't are scofflaws. I think the people who did not, again, preceding us, so I can't speak directly, but the people who did not follow the rules, I think were just ignorant of the rules and instead tried to follow the nature of the home and the neighborhood that they all love. I mean, I have neighbors who've lived here for 50 years. We are 11 years in. We're the new kids on the block. But I just don't want. I don't want to mischaracterize that somebody somewhere was misbehaving in some way. They were trying to protect their homes at the time. They did it to the best of their ability. They did it to the best of their knowledge. And that's where we stand. The one that got changed, again, that got approved, it wasn't because they were upstanding citizens. It was because they got cracked down on because they put in a hideous mess. And thank goodness this is a historic district that protected the look of the block and made them go with something more characteristic, as our fences are. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's close the hearing. Commissioner Lutfi, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Jefferson, would you second that motion?
Oh, second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. And I'll just sort of kick it off with a little bit of sort of the history of LPC actions in Jackson Heights since time of designation. And as has been discussed a little bit today, shortly after designation, a number of, well, before designation and then shortly after designation, a number of the houses had fences and walls installed, and many of them look as we see in this particular photograph. Some had piers with a fence spanning between the two, some had low walls, some had high walls, some had curbs with a fence. And so there were, while historically there were no fences right before designation, there were a number of fences and low walls. And then right after designation in the mid-90s, there were many more that were installed without permits. And so the commission thought about the appropriate approach for this garden district. And at the time, the commissioners made a site visit, I believe in 2000. We walked around the neighborhood and I think came up with 2 different general approaches for the building types. One is for the apartment buildings. They felt because they were apartment buildings and had a smaller green space, that green space could have a low fence that would not obscure the green space and still allow it to be seen and legible. And that the fence wouldn't have an odd relationship to the apartment building. And for the houses with front gardens, the commission recognized that there were issues with erosion and other issues that were happening at the time. So the commission found that low brick retaining walls would be appropriate and wouldn't obscure the green space. And so that was sort of the model that was followed for many, many years. And then for 15 or 16 years. And then in our recent rules amendment, when we amended our rules, we created a new rule codifying that policy. So now homeowners can get a staff level permit for a low brick wall, retaining wall at the front of their houses. But as we have seen, we still have applications that are coming before us for work that was done without a permit and owners are seeking legalization, or for work that doesn't comply with the rules that would allow a staff level permit. And as always, we look at the block on a case-by-case basis. And so this particular block has many fences and walls that were installed prior to designation. And I think that was part of the basis for the 2 approvals that we did grant on this block, because the context, not counting the fences and walls that were installed without permits, because those were illegal and actually subject to fair review, but the ones, there was a large number that were pre-existed designation and provided a more permanent context, which the commission evaluated for this particular block as we analyze those 2 other applications. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of context about the history of our regulatory approach for fences. Commissioner Lutfi, do you have a question?
Yeah, so you had mentioned in terms of the fences with the low walls that we have now pretty much codified as a policy, and it can get staff approval.
For houses, a low wall can get a staff approval.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you had mentioned that one of the issues was an erosion issue. And is that something we would be or should be concerned about as it affects this particular home and all the homes next to it?
You know, some of the houses have more steeply sloped front yards. And so this applicant did not state that that was a concern here. And I don't know if that's a concern on this particular block, but some of the houses do have more steeply sloped front yards. And it was an issue at the time that we were doing the site visit and something we were hearing from property owners. And so that was part of the thinking behind the low retaining wall. So, and then, so on this block, what we've approved is a low wall with a fence on top, not with the pillars that you see in this photograph. Okay, so I think that gets us to where we are today. I think, and you know, this photo actually is probably a good one to look at because you can see the condition with a wall and a fence, and then a condition with a wall, a fence with that has also pillars that rise above the height of the wall, and then a fence, which in some ways is actually more transparent. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Chapin, would you like to start this one?
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, thank you very much for going through the history of permitting, which is very helpful, I think. I think as my fellow commissioners know, the general Jackson Heights district is unfortunately marked by a hodgepodge of fences, walls of varying heights and types, some even chain link still, which have not been replaced, and stone or concrete or brick bases on these fences. Some of these were constructed before designation, and often we have things that are constructed in violation since then. And this has been in part due to the challenges, I think, of new owners with diverse language backgrounds and different experiences about historic properties. And often they just choose something they've seen as a model somewhere in the neighborhood, or they're focused on security, not attractiveness. That's why the communication that I know your staff is diligently seeks to do is so essential. However, I think in this case, this is an area where there's a row of houses which have similar architectural character and area-way fences which have evolved over time with a consistent character that just a low, particularly low group that is there. I think the fence in this case we're considering is very simple and transparent, and similar to those that are adjacent, because they were all, I guess, put in at the same time. So I actually feel in this case that these fences that are all need to be legalized eventually in this particular group can be viewed as appropriate to the evolution, to the evolving nature and history of this district as people, set up a barrier to the lawn around their property. I feel this is particularly non-intrusive the way it's constructed. So I'm actually, I feel comfortable with approving it in this case. I think it is appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldblum?
Thanks. I don't disagree with Diana. I think in this case it's appropriate. This is, she spoke about the difficulties and frustrations with these fences, and sitting here looking at this, how unfortunate the streetscape has become. It makes me think of the Upper West Side and the window problem that we have with so many buildings on the Upper West Side, Upper East Side. Here, in both cases, you have a structure that's a multifamily structure that's meant to look like a single entity architecturally. But in reality, it's really a series of townhouses here, and in West Side, it's an apartment building with 25 different occupants behind the front facade. Everybody kind of wants to do their own thing. And it's really, the genie's kind of out of the bottle already, because this one did that, someone else put piers. It's just it's a hodgepodge. Yet our process doesn't really allow for the long-term restoration of a condition that is closer to the initial intent and of the architects, and that kind of celebrates and ennobles the architecture that we are preserving. So while I think this is an appropriate one, I think we might, as a commission, think about, like with the window thing in the city, we really take a long view, right? We say, you know what, it's going to take 10 years, 15 years. People are going to get sick of their windows, and then they'll be stuck and they'll have to go back to the historic windows, and that's a good thing. Maybe there's a way to do something similar with these blocks where, the commission kind of identifies the right solution that meets the reasonable security need, and that we kind of over time chip away at it, that we are able to kind of restore the something better than the mess that's there now.
Right, and I do think that was the intent when in 2000, the commission had sort of adopted an approach to the houses, which was the low retaining wall, and since codified it. So I do think there is kind of a longer term overall approach, but it certainly is something we've veered away from on a case-by-case basis, depending on the context in the block. But I also think it can certainly be time to revisit that policy, as well as Commissioner Chapin has said, with all the years that have gone by since then, and homeowners' needs, and how do we do that in a way that respects the collective as well as the individual sites. Commissioner Chapin, did you want to add something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in this case, I meant to say the buildings are pretty large compared to some of the individual houses that are south of here, where they have sometimes much higher fences. And I think that also makes me much more comfortable with the fence here, because I think it's not really with the large lawn and the substantial building, that it's not inappropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Devonshire.
Well, because there is a quasi codification of putting fences in whatever we eventually decide is the long game, then I would say I have to approve it. I will never, ever be in favor of allowing a sophisticated applicant to be rewarded for flaunting the rules of the Landmarks Commission. The staff works too hard, the commissioners work too hard for that to just go unnoticed.
Thank you. Commissioner Bland.
I'm fine with this application, but I'll note maybe it's some difference of earlier comments. I'm not sure this is such a hodgepodge or such a mess. I don't know it as well as others might as well, I must say. I'm seeing it mostly from pictures and only occasional visits. But it seems to me this is not the picture, but the last picture that we had, if somebody could put that last one up. It seems to me as if the houses, although similar in a general way, are quite different from each other. Yeah, that one. And I hope we don't end up with one size fits all, because I think that would be inappropriate. The houses are quite different, really. And I think that therefore the nature of the fence in front of each house can be somewhat different as well. So I'll just put that in on the record for the long term, but the short view is this is an approvable situation for me.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lutfi. Oops, Commissioner Lutfi, you're muted again.
Hi, could we please go back to slide, I think it's 7? Yeah. I have to say that, first of all, I think I want to just restate the fact that I don't think the applicant put this fence in. And so the applicant inherited an existing condition where somebody else made a decision and either made it in a vacuum or made it keeping in mind what was going on around them. And truth be told, if I, it's unfortunate that this was done illegally, but I do really feel that this is a kind of a lovely low row of homes with very transparent fences that don't get in the way of the architecture behind them, whether they're the same or not, and address the issues that these homeowners are facing in terms of privacy and security without detracting from, as I said, the historic condition. I happen to agree with Fred and about the fact that I don't feel like we should have a one size fits all, because not every home is the same. And as you said yourself, Sarah, sometimes there are sloping conditions on the lawns and sometimes there are not. And when we think about brownstones, in brownstone neighborhoods, they don't all have the same frontage. And there are oftentimes when applicants come to us for changes, and as long as it works within the context, unless it's egregious in some way, we try to be flexible. So I can support this, and I am just wondering if all of these are illegal and we're going to approve this, if there is some way we can codify it so that, they don't all have to come before us, or they can be handled at a staff level.
That's an interesting question, and I'm not sure that they are all alike enough to codify something. And so I do think, and even if we are thinking of not necessarily doing a one size fits all, I do think we'll have to see them individually. But we would, of course, in each discussion, summarize the comments in today's discussion.
I think that's right.
Okay, so thank you, though. Commissioner Jefferson?
This is an interesting discussion. To think that a principle of saying we have a brick base and a fence above it, you have infinite possibilities with that scale proportion movement. I mean, it's infinite. That to say it's one size fit all somehow escapes me. I agree with Commissioner Devonshire in that, there has to be rules. I mean, if we don't have any rules, we fall into something, I don't even want to talk about that. So the rules are rules and we should follow them. And I think there's infinite variety within the idea of a brick wall and a fence, infinite. And I can approve this for now because, it's there. But I think we have to really think about it.
Okay, Commissioner Gustafson.
I agree with Commissioner Jefferson's statement of the situation.
Okay, Commissioner Holford Smith.
Yeah, very interesting conversation. I can vote to find these appropriate. And I think I really thought that Jeannie's idea was interesting that, I mean, there could be more than one option in this district and that it doesn't, I think a little variety actually, as Fred was saying, is not a bad thing. And I think that the transparency of this makes it appropriate, even though it doesn't have that low brick wall that we have since approved. So maybe an evolution of this district
Okay,
could be
great.
had.
All right, thank you. So I think we do have enough support to vote today. So Commissioner Chapin, would you make a motion? Commissioner Chapin, you're muted still.
On a minute. Just a minute. Okay, sorry. In the matter of certificate of appropriateness, Borough of Queens, LPC 22043220 34-41 83rd Street, Jackson Heights Historic District. An Anglo-American garden home style house designed by Pierre L. Kiesewetter and built in 1928-29. Application is to legalize the installation of a fence without Landmarks Preservation Commission permits. I note that the building's style, scale, material, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Jackson Heights Historic District. I recommend approval, finding that the installation of the fence did not damage any significant historic fabric, that several properties at this block feature simple metal fencing and low walls which were installed prior to the designation of the historic district. Therefore, precedent exists for such an installation. That the relatively low height, simple design, and transparency of the fence and gate, featuring simple metal pickets with a black finish, will have a discrete secondary presence at the base of the yard and within streetscape views, and that the proposed work will not detract from the special architectural and historic character of the building or the Jackson Heights Historic District.
Thank you. And Commissioner Holford Smith, would you second that motion?
I second it.
Thank you. Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 9 in favor, none opposed, the motion passes.
All right, that's approved. Thank you.
Mark, I think you forgot me.
Sorry, Jeannie, I apologize. Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
With 9 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that's approved and we'll move to the next item.
The next item is public meeting item number 3, LPC 22-08134, an application for a binding report in the Borough of Queens, Block 5917, Lot 1. This is the Fort Totten campus in the Fort Totten Historic District. The work occurs at various locations throughout the Fort Totten Historic District. The application is to construct a new switchgear house and install transformers and generators with enclosures. This was read into the record at the public hearing of June 28th, 2022, and will be presented today for the first time. The staff will do the presentation after we open the hearing.
Go ahead and open the hearing. And commissioners, just if you can unmute yourself at this step in the process. Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Holford Smith, would you make a motion to open the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Gustafson, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the hearing is open and the applicants may speak after the staff presents the item.
Good morning, Commissioners. Richard Lai, Preservation staff. As Corey said, I will present the proposal, and then we have Paul Soren of the FDNY and Sean Cutler of Stantec, who are here to answer any questions. The proposal involves sort of upgrading the electrical grid throughout the sort of Fort Totten Historic District. And as you're probably aware, sort of Fort Totten is located on this sort of peninsula on sort of the north coast of Queensborough. And it was designated as a historic district as it was a home of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers during the late 19th century. And, you know, the historic buildings comprise a sort of central core of residential and institutional buildings associated with Fort Totten. And then on the periphery, a series of fortifications and industrial buildings, which were involved in the sort of military research conducted by the Army Corps of Engineers. As well as being a New York City park, Fort Totten also houses a number of essential and emergency services, including the FDNY, NYPD, U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Army Reserve, and the Bayside Ambulance Corps. And here you can get a sense of, you know, how the area of Fort Totten is apportioned for these various uses. And the current switchgear house, as you can see here, was built in 1910. And it's a small brick structure located at the main entrance along the southern boundary, near the Con Ed substation. So a larger switchgear house is proposed nearby between two existing EMS buildings, building 103 and 107. Outside a floodplain where the current switchgear house is located. The original switchgear house will remain and will be repurposed as storage. Here are the elevations of buildings 103 and 107. And the proposed design is drawing on the sort of design details and material palettes of these buildings, as well as the switchgear house. And here are the elevations, and you'll see the renderings for the new, the proposed switchgear house. As you can see, it's a split level brick structure with a hip roof with gray slate shingles and bluestone lintels and sort of a banding between the floors. And metal-clad multi-light windows, as well as sort of through window louvers. Just a plan of the proposed switchgear house at the top floor. You'll note that there is a very tall structure, and that's for code compliancy. And our applicants will be able to speak more of that if there are any specific questions that commissioners have. Another thing to note, at the front elevation, there's a very large sort of utilitarian pair of doors and so transom window assembly, which all open up, and that's to afford access to the building to replace these large mechanical units that are going to be coming in and out of the structure. And just some further renderings of the switchgear house. And now we come to some visibility photos, just to show a photo montage of the new building within the context. Here in the foreground, you can see the existing switchgear house, and then 103 on the left and building 107 in the background. And this is through the main entrance, vehicular and pedestrian entrance to the site coming in from the south. And then here looking, again, seeing the three buildings, 103, 107, and the existing switchgear house, and you can see the change in grade necessitating the need to keep the electrical equipment outside of the floodplain. And then from the reverse side. And just the sort of materials palette sheet for what they are drawing on for the new building. In addition to the switchgear house, the proposal includes installing 11 chain link fenced enclosures on concrete pads with corner bollards to protect them from vehicles and containing sort of pad mounted transformers and emergency generators. The commission has approved 3 of these previously at public hearings. And now they're coming in to supplement that with a variety of other locations. In addition to this and the switchgear house, they are proposing some trenching and some utility poles with overhead wires, although the trenching and the poles and wires are considered to be staff level, and the trenching will be conducted in conjunction with our archaeology section as well, although the majority of the trenching that they're proposing is along existing areas where trenching has occurred. One of the proposed enclosures is sort of a unique design, just because existing one is currently located in this sort of area for the floodplain. And it's a little bit larger and taller than the other ones that they have, and that's again to raise the mechanical equipment outside of the design flood elevation. Here are just some of the previous examples of the approved enclosures that we have, and these are sort of the majority of the new enclosures will be following this sort of design. They're all sort of located within sort of rear and side yards. At some of them, some sort of barbed wire tops have sort of crept up. Those are intending to be removed, and no barbed wire is proposed for any of the new enclosures. And this gives you a sense of the plans, and then the sort of the protection of the bollards around it, which we've learned from experience that are necessary to prevent sanitation trucks, notably backing into them. We had to actually replace one of these that was approved by the commission due to the damage caused. And some of the elevations for these enclosures, and just some of the trenching details. So although it covers a large area, the sort of scope of work is relatively simple. And I thank you for your time, and I will hand it over to Paul and Sean to answer any specific questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, so we do have at least one question, but I wanted to see if the applicants wanted to add to the presentation before we begin questions, or if they're just ready to take questions. All right, Sean.
Yeah, I want to thank Richard for presenting that for us. Again, I want to stress, the nature of this project is for the infrastructure upgrade. I'm sure Paul can attest to the need for the upgrade out there. So the switchgear and the transformer pads are part of that process in providing those upgrades. So any questions you have, we'll be happy to take.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Goldblum.
Thank you. Do we have any straight on elevations of this building in combination with its 2 neighbors as seen from the street? I don't think so, but did I miss that, or was that shown anywhere?
I don't believe that was in the presentation, no.
So I'm most worried or concerned about the height of the relative structures. I mean, to my eye, based on the photographs, they don't look like they're anywhere near 45 feet off the ground, those ridges of those 2 buildings. And especially from this vantage point, it kind of de-emphasizes the relative height of this building relative to the other 2, as it would be experienced from the roadway anyway. So I guess that prompts me to ask, can the roof be lowered? And as I look at the section on, I guess that's image 19 of 53, your page 27 at the bottom, You have a cable tray clearance area, but then you have a space above it that's rather large that is untapped. Would it be possible to lower the roof to make it a little bit more in context with its neighbors without impeding function?
Just to be clear, are you saying to lower the top ridge of the roof or lower the clear height inside the switchgear building?
No, lower the, basically take the hipped roof and shove it down closer to the ground so that the eave height of this building is closer in elevation to its two neighbors' eaves. Is that clear? Make the building shorter. Make the building shorter. Make it a cathedral, you know.
That's we can look into the possibility of that. I know that we want to keep the switchgear protected and enclosed within that room. But we can look to see if it's possible to put that cable tray up into if it is truly a cathedral ceiling, to see if that's a possibility.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? All right, I don't see any other questions at this time, so we'll move to public testimony. And if you're in the meeting and would like to speak on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you. And I will turn it over to Sonia Gior to take us through the testimony.
Thank you. So our first speaker will be Helen Freeman of the Historic Districts Council. So Helen, if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Helen Freeman, Historic Districts Council. HDC is generally in support of this proposal, but with two minor questions and observations. First, we find the proportions and treatment of the transom window over the front door to be compositionally awkward. Second, we note that the neighboring buildings that have a large expanse of brick above the windows have some sort of decorative corbelled brick transition between the wall and overhang. We believe that a similar architectural detail would improve the proportions and detailing of the new building. Page 21 of Stantec's presentation shows this detail on the existing FDNY building. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Christina Conroy from the Victorian Society. Christina, I will be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, good afternoon, commissioners. I'm Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society, New York. Now, founded in New York City in 1966, the Victorian Society in America is dedicated to fostering the appreciation and preservation of our 19th and early 20th century heritage. The New York chapter promotes preservation of our historic districts, individual landmarks, interiors, and civic art. Now, this proposal can be broken down into two types of work: the construction of a new switchgear house and the installation of enclosed transformers and generators set within enclosures in several locations. The new switch house is to be located between several historic buildings: Building 103, a bungalow-type guardhouse constructed in 1892, Building 105, the original switch house built in 1919, and Building 107, a quartermaster's storehouse constructed in 1897. The designation report states that these buildings all have sturdy utilitarian character, noting that the applicant is proposing to use materials similar to those of the adjacent historic buildings, including red brick masonry, cladding, bluestone sills, lintels and string courses, and slate roofing, and that the new buildings will not touch the designated structures. The VSNY can support this proposal in concept. However, we find that the facades appear underdeveloped, that the proposal lacks detail, and urge that the applicant look carefully at the existing structures, including the cornice bracket details shown on board 11 and the photographs of corbelled brickwork shown on board 18. We also find that the historic buildings have a larger percentage of window openings and urge the applicant to add more windows. The enclosure proposed for the transformers and generators are disturbingly ugly, even for an area where the buildings have a sturdy utilitarian character. The VSNY cannot support their installation. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have a hand raised from James Singletary. And James, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept my request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
I'm sorry, my hand should be lowered. Apologize for that.
No problem. Okay, so we do not have any other speakers, any other hands raised. So I'll note that Queens Community Board 7 recommends approval. And I'll turn it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I'd like to ask the applicants if they'd like to respond. I know that Mr. Soren from FDNY has had his hand raised, so be assured we're coming back to you now, and feel free to respond to the comments we've heard and any other topics you want to raise or issues you want to raise. Thank you. Mr. Soren? Mr. Cutler, do you want to respond?
Yeah, sorry, this looks like Paul's having some difficulties at the moment. I guess in regards to the proportion of the building, you know, we studied this carefully in conjunction with our electrical teams, and you know, really tried to lower the height of the overall structure. And unfortunately, the clearances that we're being required to maintain are what's being asked of us by those teams to maintain the servicing and maintenance of the equipment and the installation. Regarding some of the details about the corbel and the detail in the eaves, as well as the transom, we can look into that detailing and see what can be incorporated as part of the structure in the application.
Okay, thank you. I just want to see if Paul can speak or not. I know his hand is raised. I don't want to move to close the hearing if he does want to add something, but are you in touch with him? Do you know if he has technical difficulties?
I'm trying to get a hold of him.
All right, and in the meantime, commissioners, do we have any other questions? All right, I'm gonna, yeah, Commissioner Jefferson, please go ahead. Commissioner Jefferson, did you have a question?
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
One technical question: from the top of the wall to the peak of the roof, is that 9'6" in all of them, or just on the new building?
Doing that for the new building.
Okay, so the others are lower, is that the case?
The others are pitched slightly higher. We're trying to lower that eave to try and lower the overall massing of the structure.
Thank you.
Okay, so some of these other buildings have higher pitch, but because of trying to avoid the floodplain and worried about the equipment, you are trying to lower the overall height by sloping your roof more.
Correct.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? All right, so I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to close the hearing, and we'll begin our discussion. If there is something that Mr. Soren needs to enter into the record, we can do that through Richard. Maybe you can be communicating with him, and as a staff person, you can add anything if something important comes up during our discussion. All right, Commissioner Jefferson, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So motion.
Thank you. And Commissioner Goldblum, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so we'll begin our discussion. And so we're looking at this new structure, switch gear structure to replace the existing one, which is modeling its materials and some of its details and proportions on the existing surrounding buildings. And then there are also the transformers around the site. So we'll begin the discussion. Commissioner Devonshire, would you like to start this one?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I think the transformer issues are fine. I agree with Michael that they should make every effort to lower the height of this building if possible. The two issues that I had, which are things they could work on with staff, is the corbelling and that transom, which seems very awkward. Otherwise, I'm fine with it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bland?
I'm in pretty much agreement with what Michael has just said. These are utilitarian buildings. But I think lowering it if possible would be helpful in improving the detailing of the brickwork as well. I just want to make a comment, not relevant to the moment here for this building, but the general Fort Totten. A number of years ago, I did a master plan for it, and like probably a lot of New Yorkers had never been there before. And I just want to comment particularly on the old fort part, which is extraordinary, built during the Thomas Jefferson era of our country. And of course, never fired a shot at an enemy ever. But it is one of the most extraordinary places in all of New York. If you don't have time or money to go to Greece or Rome to see ruins and walk around ruins, just go to this site if you can get access. I'm not sure it's open to the public. We tried to, in our master plan, make it available so that the public could explore it. It's just a fascinating place. With that said, I'll let others now talk about relevant issues.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lutfi?
Conceptually, this is an important project because the electrical has to be upgraded and maintained. And so this building is needed. I think that Michael Goldblum raised a good point about the height of the building within the surrounding context, and it should be looked at, but as well as the details, some of the details surrounding the building, the color palette and the choice of materials overall look very good and consistent. So those would just be my caveats.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson?
I'm in agreement with all my fellow commissioners that went previously to me.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Gustafson?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with my fellow commissioners as well. Nothing additional.
Okay, great, thank you. And Commissioner Holford Smith?
Sorry, I had my microphone up. Yes, I agree with the previous comments of the commissioners.
And Commissioner Goldblum. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Chapin. Let me go to Chapin and then I'll go to Goldblum. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking about this. There was a myth, apparently, that there was supposed to be a secret tunnel from Fort Totten to Fort Schuyler, but they've never discovered it. I think it's now think it may not be, but anyway. Yeah, Fort Totten's a fun place to visit. I do think, I agree with the other commissioners that if we can possibly lower the roof line, that's desirable in the context. And also, I think fine to improve that transom and the corbelling, I guess, as well. It's a utilitarian. So I would agree with the comments of other commissioners.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Goldblum.
I agree with everyone else.
Okay, and I just want to note for the record that Richard has been in touch with Paul Soren from the fire department, who is having technical difficulties, but did note that the roof, the space in the roof has conduit, but they can look into lowering it. And also the tall door is required to move large equipment in and out while providing security, as the building contains high voltage equipment. So we'll note that, but I think that we have a consensus to move today to approve this with the modifications, that they continue to work with the staff on the feasibility of lowering the height of it and looking at the detailing around the door and coming up with a solution that complements the historic buildings while still providing the security and height that they need. So Commissioner Devonshire, would you be able to make that motion?
Sure. In the matter of LPC 22-08134, the Fort Totten campus, Fort Totten Historic District, an application to construct a new switchgear house and install transformers and generators with enclosures. I recommend approval, finding that the proposed work is needed to upgrade and maintain the electrical supply for the historic district, including a number of essential city and federal services. The new switchgear house will be located outside the historic residential area at the periphery of the historic district where industrial activities were historically located. That the massing, height, and composition of the proposed split level 2-story building with punch masonry openings will relate well to the adjacent 1-story and split level 2-story buildings. That the proposed materials palette, including red brick, slate shingle, bluestone, will harmonize with the masonry materials of buildings found throughout the historic district. That the fenestration pattern featuring double hung multi-light windows with bluestone lintels and sills will recall the facade composition of other buildings within the historic district. That the tall utilitarian main doors and transom window assembly that will facilitate the installation and replacement of large equipment is simply designed and recalls the utilitarian doors at similar buildings within the historic district. That the installation of the enclosures, including transformers, generators, concrete pads, fences, and bollards, is easily reversible and will not eliminate or damage any significant architectural features of the landscape. And these enclosures will be discrete installations installed at side and rear yards that will not overwhelm the buildings or detract from the architecture or landscape features of the historic district. And the applicant will work with staff to solve stylistic issues with the building, including corbelling and the details of the transom light over the main door, and will work with staff to minimize the size and massing of the building if possible.
Thank you. Right, Commissioner Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 9 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
So that's approved, and please continue to work with the staff to explore the height and detailing. Right, and we'll move to the next item now.
The next item is public meeting item number 4, LPC 21-06265, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Queens, block 10310, lot 14, 114-14 179th Street in the Adsley Park Historic District. This is an altered Tudor revival style freestanding house designed by Arthur Farr and built in 1931. The application is to install solar panels. This was read into the record at the June 28th, 2022 public hearing, but will be presented today for the first time, and the staff will do the presentation after we open the hearing.
Right, great. Thank you very much. So we'll go ahead and open the hearing. Commissioner Gustafson, would you make the motion to open the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Lutfi, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is open, and so the applicants may speak right after the staff presents the application.
Afternoon, Commissioners. Brian Blazak, Preservation Staff. The subject property is 114 179th Street in the Adsley Park Historic District. The application is to install a solar panel array on the rear southwest facing pitched roof. This slide locates the property within the Adsley Park Historic District. And the proposed rear elevation shows the layout of the solar panel array at the rear roof. A gray painted conduit will run the length of the rear facade to the location of the AC disconnect at the first floor. This section shows the array will have a low profile and will be mounted parallel to the pitch of the roof. And a sight line shows that there will be no visibility over the primary facade. These cut sheets show that the panels will have a black on black and have a skirt to hide any equipment underneath the panels, in line with other commission-approved visible solar panel arrays. These renderings at the top of the slide show a bird's eye view for informational purposes. And most importantly, the view from public thoroughfares. On the top right is a view from Murdoch Avenue. And on the bottom, the view from 179th Place. And then this is the view from the street here that shows a lack of visibility. So just to show where those views are taken from, I'll just go back to the first slide, which shows that the, oops, went too far. The primary level of visibility will be view D here, that's Murdoch Avenue, and view E here, which is 179th Place between these freestanding buildings. So the applicant is here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. All right, commissioners, do we have any questions? All right, I don't see any questions at this time. So why don't we move to public testimony, and then we can see if the applicant would like to add anything else after that. So if you're in the meeting and would like to speak on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you. And I will turn it over to Sonia Gior to take us through the testimony.
Thank you. So we do not have any signups on this item, and I do not see any hands raised. So I will note for the record that Queens Community Board 12 recommends approval.
Okay.
Turn it back to you.
Thank you. All right, so there's no testimony. I think, and commissioners, if there are no final questions, I just want to ask the applicant, I think Sol Sahi, are you the applicant?
Yep.
Would you like to add anything before we begin our discussion?
I'm here. No, I think it's a pretty straightforward. Brian explained everything very well.
Okay. All right, so if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and close the hearing and begin our discussion. So Commissioner Gustafson, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. And we have, this is an application for a solar array on the back slope of a pitched roof of a freestanding house in a district where there are incidental views from other streets behind. And we have seen other applications for solar panels in this particular district, as well as other districts that have freestanding houses where you have pitched roofs and also views around the building. We've approved some that are on the back and some that are on the front. I'd also note that we actually have rules that allow for solar panels that are not visible or very minimally visible. And those typically apply to row houses where you have attached buildings or larger buildings that are attached. And so I think as we have our discussion today about the appropriateness of this particular installation that is on the back of the pitched roof, I'd like commissioners to think about what what a position might be generally for this particular building type, since we don't have a staff level option as readily available as we do for other building types. All right, with that, Commissioner Goldblum, would you like to start this one?
Sure. I think this is appropriate, and I think that this is the kind of thing that should be written into the staff level approvability. And I think that if the, I would suggest that if the installation is rectangular in nature, in other words, a simple shape, and if it's on, certainly if it's on a secondary facade like this one is, but even if it's on a principal facade, and it's of a similar color to the roof around it, even if that roof is a replacement roof, if such a replacement would be permitted, that it would be appropriate. I think these are important. I think it's very important that we come up with an expeditious way to encourage people to put these on their houses.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Devonshire?
I agree with Commissioner Goldblum completely.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Bland? Oops, you're muted.
Sorry. I agree. But I will say that if it weren't for such an important societal challenge that we have that is encouraging this, I think just from a visual standpoint, these things don't add anything to any house that's being considered, but I think it's overshadowed by a great distance by the societal need to do this. But I just wanted to go on record and say, it's not beautiful.
Okay, thank you. The one thing I would say, there's one we approved on a pitched roof in Sunnyside that I see frequently, and I think it is visible and you do see it, but it's low profile and flat. It's flat shape, follows the form of the roof, and I think you sort of see it for what it is. So for me, it doesn't detract from that building, and I've thought about it a lot and looking at it as I go by it and see it in different light, in different views, in different seasons. I think it's sort of seen what it is, but in a way, because of its type of installation, doesn't detract from the building.
Yeah, I think as long as they're flat against the pitched roof, I think that mitigates. If it were raised up, as some of them are, to angle the sun a little bit more accurately, it becomes much more invasive.
The solar shingles are getting better every day. My guess is that before the decade is out, they'll be the default.
I hope that's right.
All right, great, thanks. Okay, Commissioner Lutfi.
I agree with both Commissioner Goldblum and Brad.
Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson.
I agree with all comments.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Yeah, I think this is appropriate, but when we talk about, deciding that there's something, another level at which the staff can approve, obviously color and profile and the shape of the array and what slope of the roof it's on are all going to make a difference. I'm going to have to sweat that when we decide what it is that we want to let the staff approve. I do have that, I guess, the concern that I think Fred raised and Michael sort of answered, which is that I guess I disagree with you. I think that it does detract, and we do need a better way. And I don't want to end up approving these over and over when there does become a better way available. So that is my concern. We hand it to the staff and they can approve this over and over and over. And there's a new technology out there that as Michael describes, that is much more attractive. And meanwhile, we keep putting these things on the roofs. So we need to keep ourselves informed of that.
Thank you. All right, Commissioner Holford Smith.
I think this is appropriate. And I think the discussion about what would be approved at staff level is also very interesting. And hopefully the technology does improve so that the tiles can be more affordable for common use. But in the meanwhile, I think it's appropriate.
Thank you. Commissioner Chapin.
Yes, I agree with the other commissioners' comments and I can approve it.
Okay, great. Thank you, commissioners, for going, obviously for evaluating this application, but sort of going beyond and thinking about things that the staff might consider as we think about a potential rule for in the future for staff level opportunities for this building type. So we have a consensus to support this one. Commissioner Goldblum, would you make the motion?
Sure. Hold on a second. Okay. Regarding 114-14179th Street in the Edison Park Historic District, the application is to install solar panels. I note that the building's style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Edison Park Historic District. I also note that the installation of visible solar panels on pitched roofs of freestanding houses may be unavoidable in cases such as this one, due to code requirements, site conditions, and the necessity of panels to face south for proper performance and economic viability. I recommend approval, finding that the proposed work will not damage or eliminate any significant features of the roof, which is currently covered with modern asphalt shingles, that the solar panels will be placed on the rear slope of the roof and seen in conjunction with the rear facade of this and adjacent buildings will not overwhelm the roof or detract from the front of the building. That the solar panels will have a low profile and will be mounted parallel to the pitch of the roof, thereby maintaining the roof plane. That the simple rectilinear configurations and the dark uniform appearance of the solar panels and framing elements will have a neutral presence on the roof. That the installation of the solar panels will be reversible in the long term and clearly will be visually differentiated as a modern renewable energy installation, and that the proposed work will not detract from the special architectural and historic character of the building and of the Addersley Park Historic District. You're muted.
Thank you very much. All right, and Commissioner Devonshire, would you second that motion?
Second.
Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 9 in favor, none opposed, the motion passes.
All right, that's approved. Thank you. And we'll now move to the next item.
Okay, we're going to now move to the Preservation Department's public hearing agenda items. First is public hearing item number 1, LPC 22-08797, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Queens, block 1461, lot 11, 35-1488th Street in the Jackson Heights Historic District. This is an Anglo-American garden-style row house designed by C.L. Varone and built in 1925. The application is to legalize the replacement of windows and installation of bay windows without LPC permits.
Okay, commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing. The staff now has control of the presentation. Please state your name for the record and you may begin.
Thank you, commissioners. This is Leanne Pollock, preservation staff. The applicant and owners of the property would like to make a statement in advance of my presentation. So Sheila, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and give your statement.
Thanks, Leanne, and thanks to the commission. My name is Sheila Maru, and I am a co-owner of the home at 3514 88th Street in Jackson Heights. We just wanted to start with a quick land acknowledgement. Our family acknowledges that land politically designated as New York City to be the homeland of the Lenape, who were violently displaced as a result of European settler colonialism over the course of 400 years. And we do thank the New York City Commission on Human Rights for this language. We do believe it's important to keep this history in mind. We acknowledge the genocide and displacement of Native people, as well as the history of segregation and exclusion of Blacks, Jews, and immigrants. And we do remember that this exclusion was designed by and upheld by government at all levels, including the city of New York. So as we endeavor to make decisions about our historic homes, let us acknowledge this past and not echo the flawed decisions of those who lived in the homes before us and their defenders in government. So moving to this presentation, we were cited for replacing our windows during the pandemic. The historic preservation of our home is of deep importance to us. We bought this home in 2018 when we moved to New York City, and we really do love the design and appearance of our home, together with a 100-year-old oak tree that was planted at the time that the house was built behind the house. So we would request that you consider the following extenuating circumstances of our situation. First, when we moved into the house at the end of 2018, all of the windows were very drafty and also bolted shut. They were completely unusable and beyond repair. They caused excessive heat usage during the winter, and there were no storm windows installed in the house when we moved in, only a pile of broken glass storm windows that the prior owner had left in the garage. When we looked into replacing them, it was very difficult to find the correct sizes. The prior owner was aware of the landmark requirement, however, decided to let the windows deteriorate and become completely non-functional because he felt that getting through the landmarks process was too difficult and too expensive. As you can see, we live as an extended family in this house, and my father, who's here with me today, has serious health conditions, including late-stage Parkinson's disease and dementia. And these health issues continued to worsen in the couple of years after we moved into this house. It became an urgent health issue to address the non-functional window situation. Additionally, during a rainy day, we were alarmed by a crash and found that one of the windows from the third floor of our home had flown off of the house and shattered our car's windshield, which was parked right next to the house. So this alerted us to the fact that the windows were additionally a serious safety concern. This was during the COVID pandemic. Both myself and my husband were extremely busy serving patients at Elmhurst Hospital, our local public hospital, and one of the hardest hit in the country, as we all know. So we do value the historic nature of our home, and in good faith, we had prior submitted a landmarks application with specifications from our local contractor who was very familiar with the house. At that time, we had received a response saying that the plans were not acceptable and were provided with a list of firms that we were told had successfully completed projects before. And we felt that this message meant that our local contractor would not be appropriate to work with, and that using one of the firms on the list was the only feasible option that had a chance of success of getting through the process. So we contacted one of them, RL Architectural Services, and the estimate they gave us was $40,000 for the windows alone and a $2,500 filing fee, not at all including installation. It also seemed in communication with them that it would take a very long time to obtain approval to do the work and to get the very specific supplies during the supply chain challenges of the COVID pandemic. That was unworkable for our family. So instead, in light of the circumstances, we did decide to move forward and try to be as conscientious as possible about maintaining historical consistency. The measures that we took included choosing white frames, choosing windows with muntins, because the prior windows also had muntins, so trying to match, choosing slate to match the roof at the top of the house for the top of the bay windows on the first floor, replacing all of the windows at the same time to ensure consistency and matching of the windows to each other, and replacing all of the windows. We did opt for adding bay windows as we have very little internal light due to the large and old trees surrounding their house. And with my father's health conditions, including confusion, dementia, and hallucinations, increasing the light within the house with bay windows was very important to us. Walking around our neighborhood in the historic district, we see many bay windows on historic homes from the same time period as our home, so we felt that this would be acceptable. My mother is going to just say a couple of words as a co-resident of this house.
My name is Usha Maru, and both my daughter and son-in-law had excellent jobs in Boston City, where we lived also in the city. They were working for the Harvard system, but they both wanted to do the global work. And that was the main reason that we moved in this area, which is very diverse area. And we are so happy to live here in this diverse community. I almost feel like I've been living in US for 50 years. I feel like I'm back in my home here. So I really enjoy living here and appreciate it. But these kind of regulations imposed on people with these kind of health conditions, it's really under the pandemic situation. I feel like they're very, very unreasonable, and we should, as a homeowner, to preserve the house and to be able to live in here, should be able to do certain of these things. So I would really support that and hope that all of you understand and also see that how we have preserved the home and see how we have been a good neighbor around here and how we cherish the neighborhood, that you will consider utilizing what we did to preserve the house, not to make it any worse or anything. We are actually, on the contrary, preserving our house and complying with everything that a landmark would stand for. And that is what we have done.
So in conclusion, we made the decision to proceed with the replacement of windows without prior landmarks approval because we were trying to improve the health and safety of our home, specifically for our elderly parents with chronic aspiration and dementia during the extremely challenging circumstances of the COVID pandemic for our family, neighborhood, and community. And we hope that you consider this carefully and consider providing approval for the windows that we have installed. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. This is Leanne Pollock, preservation staff. I'll just run through the work quickly, as I think Sheila did a pretty good job of running through everything. As you know, 3514 88th Street in Jackson Heights Historic District. The owners received a warning letter for replacing windows throughout all facades and are seeking to legalize the windows as installed. The new windows do not match the historic in terms of material or configuration, and in some cases don't match the historic operation or details. The house is located on the west side of 88th Street between 35th and 37th Avenue. It's on the eastern boundary of the Jackson Heights Historic District. The picture on the left is the front of the home prior to the replacement of windows, noting that there were 8/8 double hung windows paired at the first floor, 8/8 windows at the second floor, and then the photo on the right shows the replacement windows with the new bay window on the first floor and 6/6 windows at the second floor. There's also one window located at the top of the gable roof, and that was changed from a 6-light window to a 1/1 double hung window. As Sheila mentioned, the owners applied to replace the windows in October 2020, and the application was withdrawn due to inactivity in September 2021. And you've heard the owner's justification for completing the work without permits. The photo on the right is the historic tax photo, 1940s. The north side facade of the house is visible from the street due to the presence of a driveway adjacent to the facade. And the left photo is the house at the time of designation, noting that original windows still appear with added exterior storm windows at this time. This is a picture of the row that they're building as part of, taken at designation. You can see their house is at the north end of the row and was a mirror image to this house at the south end of the row, kind of bookending. Here are some current conditions at the row. Many of the windows have been replaced with a mix of operation and configuration. So there's variety now in that row. And here is another picture showing the side and the front facade of the building, both prior to work and post work. You can also see that on the north facade, the configuration and operation of the dormer windows were also changed from casement windows to these 1/1 double hungs. And here's some up close photos of the side facade. This arched window is still the original window, was not replaced. So you still have the wood historic window there. And this is the view from 87th Street. There's a very small portion of the facade, that's the rear facade, that's visible from the street. This is kind of the zoomed out. It's just a small gap in the street wall that you can see through there. These up close photos are intended to show that the wood brick molds were actually retained through the replacement of the windows. They were just vinyl window inserts that were installed with an interior mutton grid. So the muttons are in between the panes of glass. And then here's an up close picture of the bay window. As noted, they did install slate shingles at that projection, but for these openings, the wood brick molds were removed as part of the installation. Here's some more close-up photos of the conditions. And then the next couple photos are just walking. Well, this one shows 3516 87th Street, which went to a public hearing for installation of vinyl windows. And that installation was legalized with the stipulation that they install exterior mutton grids. It doesn't appear that these have been installed yet. But in this condition, the historic windows were the 6/6, so the vinyl windows matched the original configuration. And then here's a picture of the building, the house that's the bookend to the one that we're looking at the opposite end of the row, the current conditions. This is another house in the row, noting that there's currently a violation at this one for window replacement that hasn't been addressed. And then the next few slides show several buildings on 84th Street that were originally built with bay windows, showing that this was, at some of these houses in this historic district, a typical feature added to the house. Some additional bay windows. And thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. And as you know, the owner is also available to answer questions.
Great. Thank you, Leanne. All right, commissioners, do we have any questions? I don't see any questions at this time, so we'll see if we have public testimony. If you're in the meeting. Oh, yes, Commissioner Chapin. Let's do one question here. Commissioner Chapin.
Yes, the pair on the row are the, I thought when you showed the picture that the pairs windows had also been altered. Is that correct or not?
That appears to be the case.
Thank you.
Or they've been replaced.
They've been replaced.
The opening hasn't been changed.
They've been replaced, and is that the one that the muttons need to be replaced on, or was that another?
That is a different house.
Okay.
That's around the corner from this one.
Okay, so the pair no longer has the original configuration. I assume that's not been approved by us, but you know, it does not have the original. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the commission? Yes, Commissioner Jefferson, please go ahead. I think if you're speaking, you're muted.
The bay windows on the opposite street, what connection am I supposed to make with the bay window that's applied to this building? Is it that it was done somewhere else, or is that the connection I'm supposed to make?
It was merely to show that there are bay windows at other houses that are in the district and built at a similar time as the house in question.
But those were original, right? They were designed.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Okay, other questions? Okay, let's now move to public testimony. And again, if you're in the meeting and would like to speak on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you. And I will turn it over to Sonia Gior now. Thank you.
Thank you. So we do have several signups. We have Helen Freeman from the Historic Districts Council, and I'll be promoting you to panelists now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Helen Freeman, Historic Districts Council. HDC finds this proposed legalization to be inappropriate. The windows should be wood or wood clad with either true or well simulated divided lights. The Oriole window is also inappropriate in its current form due to its poor quality of detail. One can imagine that there may be an elegant and appropriate way of incorporating an Oriole into this facade, and had the applicant followed the rules and worked with the LPC staff on this, it may well have been found. In this case, however, we ask the commission to reject this legalization. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next speaker will be Christina Conroy, and I'll be promoting you to panelists now. If you could please accept. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society, New York. Now, we comment on this proposal, even though the building is a few years post-Victorian, because of our concern for maintaining the integrity of the Commissioner's rules regarding window replacement. The presentation includes a number of statements that are beside the point on the question of appropriateness, and we won't comment on them. The bay window replacing a pair of wood double-hung 8/8 windows would be inappropriate, even if it had the quality and detailing of historic bay windows, which it does not. There are no historic bay windows at the houses on this uniform block of buildings, and the work is visible in conjunction with the other houses. Therefore, this change has diminished the unity of the row. Historic bay windows on 84th Street are not a precedent for a new bay window on 88th Street. Other replacement windows are inappropriate in configuration, material, and detail. The behind the glass muntins are especially noteworthy. We see no reason not to uphold the Commission's window rules in this case and urge denial of this application. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have one hand raised, Runa Ray. And so I'll be promoting you to panelists now. If you could please accept that request. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, can you hear and see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. My name is Runa Ray. I am a neighbor in Jackson Heights and a homeowner. I moved to Jackson Heights in March of 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And since then, I have had 2 children here and gotten married. I moved here and continue to love this neighborhood because of the historic aesthetics of the neighborhood. I also live in the historic district. I live at a co-op at 79th and 35th, 79th Street and 35th Avenue, Donnelly Gardens. And I moved here because I appreciate the aesthetic of the neighborhood. I enjoy taking walks with my family around the neighborhood. I grew up in New England, in Massachusetts, in a colonial town, and went to college in Boston and Harvard. And I lived in Massachusetts for 30 years before moving to New York about 12 years ago. And part of the reason that I moved to the neighborhood was because it reminded me of the historic places that I grew up and went to college in. I believe that the Maru's upgrade of their windows of their home is very beautiful and in keeping with the historic look of the neighborhood. I often choose to walk down their street, even if they're not home, to see their house, to sit on the stoop with my children when we're taking walks as a family. I like the Marus. I've also been a doctor at Elmhurst Hospital during the COVID pandemic. I moved here in part to take that job. And agree that the last few years have created extenuating circumstances for many of us. And I understand how the circumstances of the pandemic and the health of Sheila's father have really created an urgent situation, or had really created an urgent situation for the Marus. I've known Sheila's father for many decades at this point, and can attest to the fact that with his condition, partially dementia, light is very important to to having a healthy diurnal cycle. And the house was very dark before, and not well aired before the changing of the windows. So the changing of the windows has really increased the air and light inside the house. It's very beautiful inside, and I do think it's very beautiful outside, and in keeping with the historic look of the neighborhood. I encourage the Landmarks Commission to consider these circumstances and also the quality and style of the upgrade that the Marus have completed. It has really brought a lot of benefit to other neighbors. There's lots of children who play in the yard and the driveway around their house. And I think it really, improves their experience and our experience as a family member and neighbor in the neighborhood. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I do hope you approve the windows of the Maru's house.
Thank you. So we do not have any other signups. Just see that there's a hand raised. Not sure whose hand is raised. Someone on the applicant team. But I will note that Queens Community Board 3 recommends disapproval and suggests that the applicant work with LPC staff. And we did also receive a letter from the next door neighbors supporting the application, noting that the previous owner allowed the property to fall into disrepair, which the current owner is trying to remedy.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to turn back to the owners now and ask if you'd like to respond to the comments or add anything else.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I did just want to briefly read the testimony from the neighbor who wasn't able to be present, who I think you guys have it in writing, but I'll just briefly read it out loud. It's pretty short. We are adjacent neighbors to 3514 88th Street, and we are very appreciative of the spirit in which the owners, Sheila and Duncan Maru, maintain the property. The prior owners on the property had little regard for general upkeep and maintenance, and as a result allowed the property to fall into disrepair. We feel that the Marus worked to maintain and improve the property within its historic aesthetic and within the context of the Jackson Heights Historic District, and we welcome neighbors who bring this positive attitude to home ownership. We appreciate the important mission of the Landmarks Preservation Commission and the vital work that it does for the city to oversee our historic structures and our historic districts, especially in the light of many examples where such structures and districts were irrevocably altered or even tragically demolished. We recognize that living in a historic district places increased responsibility on property owners to follow LPC policies. However, we also feel that sometimes those policies, while well-intentioned with the eye on the historic look of a community, can have detrimental effects when followed without regard to the context in which small-scale private property owners are placed. The increased costs that fall upon property owners can instead lead property owners to defer or ignore much needed maintenance, as was the case at 3514 88th Street until the Marus purchased the property. Fortunately for our community, the Marus have chosen to step up and improve their property in an aesthetically respectful manner. We hope that there is a place in our neighborhood and our city for the improvements that have been made to their historic homes, for them as a family and for other neighbors who work respectfully to maintain and improve their historic homes. Thank you for considering this comment, Michael and Kristen Perella, 3506 88th Street, number 2G, Jackson Heights.
Okay, thank you. All right, commissioners, do we have any final questions? All right, so if the applicants don't have any final comments, we're going to close the hearing now and begin our discussion. So commissioners, I'm starting to send requests to unmute so that we can do that. All right, and Commissioner Gustafson, would you make, yes, please go ahead.
Two things. The one is that my husband worked all his life into the energy field in this country, and he's worked for 50 years and also has gotten 12 patents in his name, and also has gotten an award for the best immigrant.
That's nice. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we're gonna we're gonna close our hearing. So Commissioner Bland, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
And Commissioner Gustafson, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, so the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion to legalize windows that were installed at this building without permits. This photo shows the pre-existing historic windows and the new windows on the right, and the windows at the top of the gable and the dormer windows on the side have also been replaced, as well as other side windows. So we'll begin that discussion. Commissioner Holford Smith, would you begin this one?
Sure. Well, this is very unfortunate. The fact that they actually went to Landmarks to try to do the right thing and then decided to abandon that course of action. It's almost worse than someone who just does it without even knowing that there are regulations. And it's unfortunate that they chose what I think is not really an appropriate window, a vinyl window that doesn't match the original configuration. It's, obviously it's difficult when someone's already done the work. But I do think that the windows that face the street really should be put back to what they were originally, 8/8s. And the bay window, well, it could be inappropriate in a location, but I don't think it's appropriate here, given the fact that there is a twin on this block. And also I guess I don't need to, because the quality of the work maybe is not relevant here, but it certainly is not of the quality of the original building. So I think that as a compromise, I would suggest replacing the windows on the street face and including the bay window, and maybe allowing the rest of the windows to stay.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chapin?
Yeah, I agree. And perhaps, Sarah, when we're done, you might also just address the process issues that the applicant raised earlier, if there's, if there is something relevant. The problem here is that the non-external buttons are very obvious, I think, and just totally aren't appropriate. And on the the configuration of the front facade was completely changed without any, it really needs to be what it was originally. I agree with Commissioner Holford Smith. And possibly on the side, which is also fairly visible, there could be some external buttons placed to make that look a little more, appropriate. But and the ones that are not visible, I think, and just, those could, I think could be, stay as they are. But I agree that the front facade really in particular needs to be replaced. And I think that if the side, the muttons are all interior, as I think they are, that there should be some external muttons placed, which I think can be done. I defer to people with more windows, knowledge and experience. At least the original brick molds have not been changed, which is a positive, obviously. I don't have a problem with a change in operation on the dormer windows, because I don't think that's something perceptible, particularly to, on the house. So, and yes, there are lots of bay windows in this district. It's a very nice feature, but unfortunately, this house was not characterized by that. So it's a substantive change. So I agree with Ann on those issues. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Commissioner Goldblum?
Okay, thank you. I certainly agree with Ann on this. I feel bad for the family that they're going through what they're going through, but and I guess I'm sure that everybody who appears before us, many people who appear before us, I'm sure have equally heartrending stories, but we have a job to do, and our job is to preserve the historic integrity of the district and to keep the historical qualities that made the house attractive to this family and made the house attractive to the neighbors who like it. And part of that is this kind of granular, annoying, frustrating, difficult kind of house by house, window by window work. And I think that the work that the applicant knowingly chose to do in the face of known obstacles was really just not appropriate. And if we were to allow it here, it would destroy, anyone else would have a similar excuse. I just think that it's just not, I feel bad for them. I'm sure that the staff can work with them in terms of timing. I think it's got to be corrected. I just don't see a way around it. And in terms of the grid appliques, the fact that the guy down the block didn't do it yet lends me to believe that it may be something that might be a bit of an idealistic approach. We might not be able to get it. I personally have never seen a post facto applique that has been offered for purchase anywhere. Maybe they do exist. I'd worry that they might void the warranty of the window because they'd have to somehow be attached to the frame. But that's really up to the applicants and the staff to settle. I think it's a fine solution for the side windows if it is in fact doable. But I would suggest that the staff verify that it is in fact something that can be done.
Thank you. Commissioner Devonshire?
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues. If the process had been followed and adhered to, we wouldn't be discussing this today. And so while that's unfortunate, this is where we are. When I look at the new Oriole window and look at the old window, it actually looks like there's more glass on the original. So, the discussion of there being more light, I think is fallacious. In any case, I agree with what my colleagues have said. And unfortunately, I think it needs to be redone.
Okay, and do you have thoughts about the front facade versus the side facade?
I think the front facade definitely has to be redone. I agree with Michael. I don't know about. I think attaching muntins fake muttons to the exterior of a window is a recipe for deterioration and disaster. So I'm not quite sure how that could be approached. I think they should work with staff on that. I don't have any problem with the operation of the dormer windows.
Okay, thank you. All right, Commissioner Bland.
The word unfortunate's been used several times by previous commissioners' comments, and I would think that that's a pretty good word to describe the situation. Very unfortunate. I'll also point out, as Michael Devonshire just has, the amount of light coming in through that oriel window, or the window, is determined by the masonry opening, not by the oriel or bay window aspect of it at all. So that's a fallacious argument, has been just said. I would support, as a huge compromise, frankly, but I would support the idea that the front windows should all be changed back to the appropriate stylistic that mimics or replicates really the original. And again, as a big compromise, to let the others stand. I think it is a big compromise, but nonetheless, it's a difficult and unfortunate situation.
Thank you. Commissioner Lutfi.
I agree with my fellow commissioners, and I do think it makes sense to work with the staff on the application of the exterior muttons. If it can work, it's ideal on the side. And if it can't, unfortunately, can't.
Okay. And Commissioner Jefferson.
This is an interesting one for me. It's not unfortunate. They knew, they understood what they were doing. That means that they didn't understand. Unfortunately, mean they didn't understand. They did understand. So they decided to do it anyway. And I find that difficult. I think rules and laws should be obeyed. And I know from my experience that you do these things and you want to get a compromise. So it falls halfway and they win anyway. And I am very difficult for me to compromise. I think rules are rules. And if you're going to live in a historic community, you follow the rules.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Gustafson.
Yeah, well, I agree with my fellow commissioners. That we saw earlier an application in which which we see frequently, where the homeowner has an inherited situation where someone else chose to violate the law, and sometimes we see unsophisticated applicants who are unaware or not educated. And here we have someone who did not inherit the situation. They understood exactly what the law was and simply decided this was not a law that they wanted to follow for whatever reason they had. The implication that the commission may or may not have been available to help them during the pandemic seems somewhat absurd to me, as we met continuously throughout the intensity of the COVID epidemic, and our staff increased their flexibility and their speed and retained their talent level throughout. So the implication, it's never said straight out, but it's always there, and it's very disturbing. The standard is, as it always is in these situations, setting aside all of that background, is whether we would have approved this in the first instance. And I think my fellow commissioners have reiterated this over and over. There is no chance. And so I do agree with all of the solutions suggested. I am okay with the and how they've divided up the solutions for the front facade versus the secondary facades.
I'm sorry, you are okay with that?
I am okay with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, commissioners, for this discussion. I do agree this is unfortunate, and thank you, John, for talking about how the commission continued all operations during the pandemic. And in fact, we moved quickly to have virtual hearings and to to create an electronic application process within days of the shutdown at the time. So we were available, and as I understand, and Diana Chapin asked about the process issues. As I understand it, there weren't process issues. We received the application. Our staff responded quickly with a materials checklist requesting additional materials, and we didn't hear back. So unfortunately, I think the owners were, it was a terrible time for everybody. They were in the thick of it, and I think maybe had greater fears or misconceptions about the process, and unfortunately didn't stick with it. We understand that all homeowners need assistance, and we work very hard to provide hands-on customer service and assistance. So it is unfortunate on all ends. And so this discussion was very helpful. I think that we may actually have enough votes for a compromise. Not everybody, I think, is going to support that, but I think we have enough to support a motion that would deny the windows on the front facade and require the applicant to restore the historic configuration and window on the front facade, and to allow the windows on the side facade to remain with the installation of an exterior munting grid. Having said that, if we do find that there is a technical issue with the munting grid, we would have to address that again. But for now, assuming that that is an installation that can happen, I think we'll go ahead and make that motion and see if we have 6 votes for that. So Commissioner Holford Smith, would you go ahead and make that motion?
Sure. In the matter of LPC 22-08797, 35-14 88th Street in the Jackson Heights Historic District. An Anglo-American garden-style row house designed by C.L. Varone and built in 1925. Application is to legalize the replacement of windows and installation of bay windows without Landmarks Preservation Commission permits. I note that the building's style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Jackson Heights Historic District. I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the majority of the replacement windows were installed in the original wood frames with profiled brick molds, thereby retaining these historic elements without modifying the masonry openings. That the multi-light configuration recalls the proportions of the historic windows, and that some of the replacement windows match the historic windows in terms of operation. That the white finish is in keeping with the original paint color and relates well to other houses in the row. That bay windows are a feature found at other buildings of a similar age and style on other blocks within the historic district, and that the slate roofing at the new bay window matches the historic roofing material present at this building and is consistent with the roofing material used in the surrounding streetscape. And that because the side facade is partially obscured by the presence of a gate and wall at the driveway, and the rear facade is only minimally visible from the street, the addition of bay windows and change in material configuration and operation and details of the windows at the side and rear facades has not diminished the special architectural or historic character of the building or the streetscape. However, I find that the front facade of the building was designed as a mirror image of the house at the south end of the row and is a prominent element of the streetscape. Therefore, the change in window material, configuration, operation, and details, and the addition of a bay window at the first floor of the front facade detracts from the special architectural and historic character of the building and the streetscape, and that between the glass muntins at visible window locations lack the articulation and detail of the historic windows and do not successfully recall the historic muntins. Therefore, I recommend that all windows on the front facade, including the bay window, be removed and replaced with new windows matching the details, materials, operation, configuration, and finish of the historic windows, and that exterior muntin grids be applied to visible windows at the side facade, working with staff.
Thank you. And Commissioner Gustin. Sorry.
And with the condition that if those muntins cannot be manufactured a reply that they would have to replace the windows or come back to the commission. Staff.
Thank you. All right, and Commissioner Gustafson, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right, Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin. Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 9 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
Okay, so that's approved with the condition that the front facade windows match the historic windows and that there is a solution with applied muntins for the side windows. So please continue to work with the staff on that. All right, so we're now going to break for lunch. It is 1:29. We're about 45 minutes behind schedule. So we will resume at 2 o'clock with public hearing item number 2. So during the lunch break, we'll ask all attendees to exit the meeting and voluntarily so that you can easily re-enter the meeting at 2 o'clock. All right, thanks, everybody.